Ready to roll?
Yes.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the first meeting, January 3rd, 2023. We have several items on the agenda. Number one is a reorganization. You'll have to just tell me exactly what we're doing. I suppose we are electing a chair and a vice chair.
Yes, so because the planning commission has new members theoretically that can come and go every year, although, you know, both you and I think it was Sean were reappointed. You're supposed to do a reorganization every year. Council does it every other year because the election, for us, we have new appointments every year, so we reorganize first meeting of the year. Well, yeah, I guess we should do we've called the meeting to order at what time? Let's say 7:05, 7:02. Let's look at the real time.
7:02.
Let's do, it was a minute ago. My watch says 7:03, so let's do 7:02. Since every clock in this room is different. All right, so anyway, floor is open for nominations. They can be made by anybody, or anybody.
Nominate Dan for chair.
I'll second. Any other nominations? Hearing none. We'll put that to a vote. All in favor of myself, Dan, being nominated to the chair?
Aye.
Opposed? It passes. I guess I'm the
You are
continuing and new chair.
unanimously the continuing chair.
B item is the election of a vice chair. And as point of discussion, our current vice chair is Jonathan. He's not here to defend himself.
Well, then I'll nominate him since you're here.
I haven't
That's what happens. You're not here.
You're not here.
I haven't heard that he would object or be against it or
No,
anything of that nature. So,
Oh, thanks.
all right. So Al is nominating Jonathan Hall for vice chair. Is there a second?
Second.
Second.
Okay.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It carries. Jonathan Hall is elected vice chair.
All right, welcome back.
Yeah. Like nothing's changed. It hasn't. All right, item number 2. You ready? Item number 2 is the continued review of the Ridge Final Subdivision Land Development Application.
I have a PowerPoint here that I'm pulling
You
up.
going for
Oh,
this? You going for the sympathy vote tonight?
You bet. Must work. Sorry.
Did the ice get you?
No, not surgery.
Oh,
Surgery on new hip.
ooh.
Ooh.
Yeah,
Wow, we both were really excited for that.
5 days ago. So
Wow.
I'm doing well.
They got you up quick.
Yeah,
All right, let's see here. PowerPoint. I know you sent me, or are you going with just the last?
I
one?
really didn't. It's only there if you so wish to refer to it. I think we had addressed all of the engineering items. And which you'd asked us to table last month so that we could do so. We have. Unless there is some additional items that we have missed or you want to add to it, hoping we can move forward with a recommendation this evening.
Okay. I'll ask Mrs. Dan Dieseroth. I'm sorry, I should, and I apologize, I don't know your name.
That's okay. My name is Kelly.
Kelly?
Yeah.
Okay, Kelly. If you would give us any comments you may have on their submission.
Sure. So the majority of the technical comments have been cleaned up. It's more of the administrative type comments. I know we're still looking for a deed that showed 125-foot setback on some of the plans, just to get some clarification on that. And I know we did receive updated plans in a response letter today that said that would be provided under a separate cover. So yeah, there's nothing major on the engineering side that remains.
Okay. Any comments from,
I'm not sure I heard all yours, but in the letter that I saw, and I think it's been addressed, given. The ownership of the property was still in the Marlwell name. Is that still current?
It is until all permits and approvals have been received. The developer won't take title to it. Then they will from Marlwell. So our applicant is the owner by contract. And that's all the applications have been made as owner by contract.
And we do have records to confirm that.
Okay. the issue of the bonding of the street trees and sidewalk, that was still open. I think your position was that's mandatory.
We
You were
do,
asking for a waiver. Did we come to a conclusion on that?
well, so that's what you would be voting on
Okay.
whenever the planning moves forward.
Okay. Um,
But not tonight.
Well, no, I mean, you make a recommendation on, because it's a modification request. So you all would have the opportunity to vote on that as well.
and forgive me, because I don't know when some of these should occur. So the
Yeah.
payment to the Stormwater Facility Management Fund, is that been complete or is that?
Developers, it'd be done with the developers agreement.
Yes.
Okay.
And those things, like a lot of the things that fall under the general comments section of these letters, like the ones that you're gonna see on every plan, which is going to be developers agreement, that stormwater management fund, you know, for these, at least for the major developments, the ones that aren't simple subs. Almost always that occurs as a condition of town council approval. And so once it gets through all of the public meeting voting processes, then that's when we go to work in my office and make sure that all of those things are coordinated before we cut them loose.
Same with the execution of the Stormwater Management Facility.
Yes.
The letters from the utilities to confirm service.
It kind of varies, but it's not, in my experience, been a reason that we would hold up a plan if we don't have a good reason to believe that they won't provide that.
And I would imagine similar to the development agreement with the town.
Yes, we only do that after approval because we incorporate the conditions in.
And you don't sign the plat until all those conditions are.
Exactly. So anything that is made a condition of final approval, which often includes like the conditions that you all recommend, like the town engineer's letter, everything be satisfied on that. That covers all of that. So what happens is when they have the recording plan, you know, prepared and they put all their signatures on it, drop it off for us. If all of those conditions aren't met, we just sit on it until they are. So the lots are not officially created until all the conditions are met.
And there's a time frame on that, right? A limit?
So it's a little loose. Actually, the county typically says baseline 90 days minimum.
Yeah.
However, they accept an administrative extension from us, which we have discretion to exercise.
Oftentimes what happens is you won't receive NPDS permits or a PennDOT highway occupancy permit after the 90 days. So again, what you do is you wait to get all the permits, not at the town, but at the state, county level. Then you come back to the town and
Right.
say, okay, we're past the 90 days, and administratively, they just acknowledge that it's been given that extension.
I think the county actually allows for just a default extension from the date at which all conditions were met. So yeah, we just have a fancy little clause sticker that we slap on there and sign it again.
Okay, well, I won't belabor the step-by-step basis. Okay,
I forget the
Any more?
recreation.
there are a couple more in there, but.
No,
Is that a
but
payment
we're
in
in
lieu?
personal ones.
It will be, yeah,
Okay,
per unit. And again, we collect that, you know,
Yeah.
as things are being handled administratively.
Any comments, Brendan?
You're not.
Any on this side? Yes.
Yeah, I just had a couple, I guess, of clarifications. One is for engineers. So I think one of the outstanding things was that the BMP design calculations were, I don't know, removed or not. I mean, is everything, so you're saying everything with the
Yeah.
stormwater calculations report that was in her packet is up?
So we had them before and then I think they were just accidentally removed. So the comments just to make sure it's included so we can see the infiltration calculations that were provided as part of it. So I know we did receive the resubmission today and I did do a quick check, and that was included. So today it has been included. I've seen that.
Okay, all right. And then I just have, I guess, a couple of what ifs. So this would be for you. I know some of these are gonna be redundant, but you've designed this development with the westerly lots to have the underground private storm line
Yes,
with the private easement that ultimately obviously goes into your stormwater management detention pond. What, on a practical level, the way that I think it was that every owner, and I'm not sure what the definition of owner is, parcel owner, I think it said, is responsible for maintenance of their private stormwater systems. So what happens if one of those westerly property owners, that line gets clogged, the clog happens to happen on their property, it gets clogged, it breaks, something unfortunate happens, then that's going to impact the integrity of the entire system. And then I worry about, then it'll back up, then it could go over the hill to the downslope neighborhood. So on a practical level, how are you handling that what if bad scenario?
Yeah, I don't know the specific language you're referring to in the covenants that say what you just said about each property owner is responsible for their own.
It
But
might
I
have
th-
said
I think-
owner, it said parcel owner.
Yeah, I
Parcel owner
think
was the
what
word.
it's, I think what it's, if we had the whole homeowner association documents, I believe what it says is that the HOA, homeowners association, will maintain the private sewers. So that's not going to be maintained by the individual. If there's a break from the house to that pipe, I'll call it a lateral, that's the responsibility of the individual homeowner.
Right.
But as soon as it hits that collective pipe, then that becomes part of the HOA responsibility.
I
And
think
so
I was taking
that's who takes the
the
responsibility.
language from your stormwater report. And that was,
Yeah,
I could understand the laterals being the property owners.
yeah,
But not there has to be, I mean, and there was specific language also in the report about the maintenance protocols that would be required for inspection and everything with the detention pond.
I'll check back. The engineers write the stormwater reports. And maybe they didn't really look closely enough at the covenants. Because the covenants are the ones that are going to really govern here. And they'll tell us that the HOA is responsible for all of the private storm easements.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that's
Yeah.
all buttoned up because, you know, obviously on this site, stormwater has been an ongoing concern.
Yeah.
The other, thank you. The other thing that I think is redundant on my part as well, but the what if of, I don't believe I believe you do not have your PennDOT permit yet.
Mhm.
And part of that PennDOT permit, I believe, would be approval for you to work either on or in the right of way for the construction of the Route 19 sidewalks, which were required. Or which you agreed to do.
Yes,
So what if, I don't see this happening, because I think you've told us that PennDOT is cooperative, is indicated they will be cooperative, but what happens if for some reason your PennDOT permit does not allow you to construct those sidewalks? Have we ever, and I think we talked about in that unfortunate circumstance that there would be again a payment in lieu that could be used for sidewalks somewhere else in the town, but there's nothing that I see anywhere in any of the documentation that we've been given over time that I guess confirms that.
Yeah, so the last time I remember talking about this, I think I had spoken with the town attorney. And he said that basically that would be something that we could work into a condition of approval, at least, you know, once we get to the council point.
But wouldn't we want it to be part of, or if my fellow commissioners agree, wouldn't we want that to be part of our recommendation
Yeah,
that
I think that makes
that
sense.
condition be applied?
My advice on that would be, yes, that's totally fine to include in your recommendation. I just don't have an exact dollar amount at this time because we try to base that off of quantities or lineal feet, and we don't have that cost estimate data yet. So we could maybe do it on, you know, at an amount to be determined with the town engineer and town attorney, you know,
Yeah.
something like that. Yeah.
But right now, we're looking at approving a plan that has sidewalks on it.
Well,
If
recommend
that
it.
doesn't, if
Yes.
that doesn't happen, then they need to
Then the
modify
right.
something.
And so the way that we would usually write that condition is like, if it, you know, the developer is not granted the HOP, or if PennDOT is not in agreement with this plan or whatever, then
We
this
do
will
something
happen.
else, yeah.
It basically means that the plan that you've approved is no longer approved if we don't meet that
I'm
condition.
actually trying to avoid that.
Yeah.
For your sake.
Yeah.
The coming back, I get that. I was actually trying to avoid that or preempt it so that it didn't create the need to come back.
Well, I think it's worth bringing up. I'm glad it's on the record because stuff happens and
Especially with PennDOT.
it's worth having had this
People
discussion.
forget. Those were my questions.
Ann, any comments?
No, thank you.
Do we go to public comment on this issue?
What is, which
With
one?
the very
Right.
first issue, the very first motion? Or do we, before we vote on it?
So before we take any votes to recommend, I think, yes, that would be wise. I think it's fine to not have, break it out. So like, okay, now you can comment on this one and this
You wanna
one.
do it?
Because usually the modifications work in tandem with the plan as presented, you know?
Okay, well, we can go through all the three tentative motions.
Why don't we, so what we should do is ask for public comment now, because you all have availability for the agenda copies out there, right? So you could see what the tentative motions are. Okay. Yeah, so I think we can just call for public comment on everything being considered.
Would you like to make comments?
And you are making a public comment, so it's a
Oh,
good
do you
thing.
want me up here now?
Absolutely,
Oh.
that's totally fine. I was just kind of,
Okay,
I wasn't sure.
so I don't know if you were able to put that, just for simplification, that's.
Oh,
what we
yes,
talked about.
yeah, you sent me something earlier. Okay. Let me pull that up and then I can put it on the screen.
And in the meantime, can I have your name and address?
Yeah, Brian, my wife Jane, Wright, WRIGHT, and we're at 10061 Oak Ridge Drive. You want me to go ahead before the thing's pulled up?
Sorry, I'm just writing
That's okay.
public comment notes. Yeah, it'll be there momentarily, so
Okay,
feel free to
That's
speak
okay.
in, speak
It's
easy,
not
like,
entirely necessary. It's just something for reference.
Chris, please keep an eye on the clock for 5 minutes.
No,
Sure will.
it's brief. So as you might recall from previous meetings, my wife and I reside directly behind the northwest corner of the development in question. And we also claim ownership of the land that extends 38 feet beyond our original property line by virtue of our adverse possession of it. So we believe the plans as drawn infringe upon our real estate. We've discussed the situation with the architect, Mr. Victor, and he's assured us that the developer and the potential future owner of this land which has been previously discussed as well, Mr. Zakaitis, has no interest in altering that land within 38 feet of our property line in any way, shape, or form. So to that extent, we're optimistic that if Mr. Zakaitis becomes the owner of the adjacent parcel, we'll be able to work out an amicable resolution with respect to that the section of property at issue. However, as it currently stands, Mr. Zakaitis, as you know, is not the property owner, and the current owner is Mr. Marwa. And Mr. Marwa recently has advised us that he believes we are trespassing on his property and has threatened legal action against us if we do not immediately cease and desist from doing so. So we just want to have it on record that we in fact are not trespassing on Mr. Marwa's property as we own it by adverse possession. We have no intention of relinquishing our ownership of that parcel. It's approximately 0.095 acres. That's the survey that shows that as well. And I bring this to the committee's attention in the interest of candor and to be certain that the record is clear that we are the owners of that parcel and we do not consent to the development plans as they're presented because they infringe on our property. Now, again, I said I've discussed this with Mr. Victor, and he's assured us they're not planning to
You've
alter
made a
that.
comment a couple times that you are the owners by adverse possession. Has that been adjudicated?
Well, no, because only recently, literally maybe 2-3 weeks between the last meeting and now, we received a registered letter from Mr. Marwa saying that he's become aware that we are using that property and we need to cease and desist within 30 days. So again, I'm not a lawyer, but my understanding of how this works is until he pushed the issue, we didn't need to do anything necessarily. So now that he is.
Oh, I thought you had, my mistake. I thought you had actually filed or a prior meeting said you were about to file a proceeding.
No, I never said we had filed. Our intention was to, but
Was to file.
as we retained counsel, it was explained to us, he needs to file for an ejection first. And then at that point, you would, so I'm not, and to my knowledge, he hasn't filed that. He's just told us to get off. Our attorney is responding, and my understanding is at that point, he would, he could either choose to let it go and say, it's yours, I don't need it anyways, or he could file an action, an ejectment, in which case, at that point, we would file an action to quiet title.
Yes.
So-
And Mr. Vic, is that correct? Do I have that right? Okay.
But before any of us potentially say anything, because I appreciate what you're bringing to our attention, but since this is now an active legal matter, we kind of just want to be careful with how much back and forth we get in at this meeting about it. So Steve Corbel, are you available right now?
Yes,
Hey, since we chatted about this subject earlier, would you mind just giving us some advice as to how the town would handle this information?
yeah, my view is this, that because the matter is not yet been adjudicated, like it's really not for the planning commission or even town council to pass judgment on it. I think the proper course here, or the most reasonable course, is for us to simply include conditions in our approval that would address this matter to the extent that a court would declare that the rights are the owners of that property. It's so small, it probably won't have much of an impact on the development, but we should probably have language in a condition, and probably something in any development agreement that would address how we would proceed. We'd have to probably put our heads together with the engineer to sort of, suss that out a little bit. But that's the way I see this issue. I'm thankful that Mr. Wright has let us know about it, because we can have an appropriate condition on any approval that this group or council would consider. But really, for us to get into the details or try to guess where this is going to go, it's really not worth the time or effort.
So are you suggesting that condition as a way to not require in the future a resub to change the property boundary lines on the parcel?
No, the condition would be to the extent that losing that 0.095 acres or whatever it was, if that would any way change any of the requirements on the developer, if a court would enter an order granting the rights that property, they could just record that order. That's typically enough without coming back to us for any sort of subdivision. I think I would prefer that they would, but I'm not so sure legally that they would be required to do so, particularly if they're not doing anything, planning to develop that area, etc.
I think also the questions might be, for example, in these single family subdivisions, you often see the lots that are kind of longer in the back to hit that like acreage minimum lot area. So again, it's a pretty small amount, but just in case that changes it so it doesn't meet our zoning requirements or anything like that, maybe the condition could be we consult with town attorney, town engineer, and then maybe
I'm
make an
saying that the
adjustment.
plat that will be filed may not be the final plat.
Perhaps.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there could be like a lot line revision or something come from it. Yes. Right, Steve?
Correct. Yep.
That's all I'm saying.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And I have a procedural question. How do we, if we are to go through these three tentative motions that we have before us this evening, how do we incorporate this discussion into any one of those three? Or is it added later and we take it on faith that it will be added later?
So anytime you want it to be an actual condition of your recommendation, entered into the record, that's if it was speaking to like, we're only granting this modification request, which for example, we've got this slope, grading question.
Right. That's a
If-
different issue though.
Right, like when you're talking about the whole plan approval, you would wait until that final motion to recommend to town council to attach those conditions.
So that means we would not even address that tonight.
You would,
You could, yeah, but it would be under the third tentative motion.
yeah, so that would be letter D in this section.
Oh, we can add conditions there. I thought they had to be on the agenda.
You know,
I guess that's my point.
the-
Every
That's an
every time we
interesting
bring up a
question.
new issue
um,
that isn't listed here, are we just indefinitely
so
perpetuating?
we
this?
have the lawyer here, so let me take a stab and then you tell me if I'm on the right track, Steve.
Yeah.
Putting on my fake lawyer hat for a second. So in my experience, since this sunshine law amendment has come out, conditions have not been, conditions being added to a motion have not been a trigger to have to
Okay.
amend the motion and republish the agenda. Now, if we were adding, this is why when I'm not sure if a plan is ready to move forward, I kind of want to see what you all think. I mark it as tentative, so that way it's on the agenda at all and we don't have to mess with that. But so that readers know, well, this might happen, it might not, we could vote on it, because you used to be a little able to wing it a little more
Mhm.
before the amendment. I don't think conditions trigger that. Steve, are we on the same page?
Yeah, they do not. It would be different if we forgot to put something on the agenda, right? With respect to an entirely different development. But adding a condition after discussion that the plan has to comply with all town ordinances and regulations to the extent that this legal matter is decided in the right's favor, that doesn't need a separate voter or anything there, so.
All right,
That's
I
a good
guess
question.
I'm just a little confused as to why we would want to, I'm sympathetic, Mr. Wright, but it's a private property matter.
absolutely.
And why it would be imperative, important, or necessary to add any condition to any motions tonight on our recommendation related to that matter. Steve? I mean, do we really need to get the town involved by adding some kind of condition to a private legal matter?
Well, I don't see this as us getting involved in the private legal matter. More than that, I see it as a way to just protect the town and our ordinances to the extent something would materially change about the development due to this litigation. I think that's probably not very likely, but I'd rather have a condition like that involved just in case something would come up. Because if something does come up later and we didn't have a condition, everybody's going to point the finger at me or RJ and say, why didn't we have a
Say you
condition?
knew, why didn't you
So, wait a
acknowledge
minute, so
it?
you're
Yeah.
just to be clear, you're just suggesting the generic condition meets all of the, the boilerplate, not anything that specifically relates to this issue.
Yeah, I think I would probably tag this as including but not limited to that potential litigation matter, but it's not, it could be anything that would. You're right. The boilerplate condition would probably apply, but I would like at least to ping this item just so it's clear and nobody argues over intent later.
So here's what's going to happen when we get to the third motion in this section, Steve. You're going to dictate to me what I'm writing down for how we're wording this condition if everybody wants to move forward with it, because I don't want to
Yeah.
screw it up if we do use
Okay.
it.
Absolutely.
Okay. So we are to the first,
Was your comment?
oh, I'm
I
sorry.
didn't know if I.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Just wanted to make sure.
Thank you. I didn't mean to cut you off, but I did. Any other public comments? None? All right, so the first tentative motion is to recommend town council approve or reject the modification request number 1 to permit a fill slope of 2.5 H grading code requirement 3H IV behind lots 1 and 2 in order to save 4 large trees at the rear of the property. And these are the 4 large trees actually on your or on this disputed property, I presume.
Well, 3 of the 4, there's some question as to which trees we're talking about. Steve and I had a discussion this afternoon. We're not sure we got the right trees pegged, but yeah. For the purposes of your discussion, it might not matter.
Whether this matter that you're initiating, is successful or not, either way, they would need a grading modification to
Okay.
make it work.
And as I understand it, this grading modification is relatively slight. based on what I thought I had heard Mr. Dieseroff say in the past, in order to save 4 large trees. And
He
I
didn't
think,
have an issue with it.
and I think that's been discussed a little bit. So before we vote on that, do you have a comment? Oh, I thought you said you had an issue with it.
No, I said, I thought that the engineer had stated he didn't have an issue
Okay,
with it.
I'm sorry. I misunderstood you. So all in favor of the motion to allow that modification?
We need a first and a second.
Okay,
Who's our first?
So moved.
Okay, thank you, Shelley. And Al, you wanted to be the second, right? Okay,
so now we're voting on the motion. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Modification approved. The second tentative motion is to recommend to town council modification request for the applicant to bond the street trees and sidewalks. Applicant requests this due to the length of the time between the beginning of the site work and the final sale and the construction of individual properties. I would like someone to tell me the implication of so doing this.
yeah, I mean, I can speak, I'm sure Kelly could as well, but this would not be our recommendation. This is typical of every development. Everyone has to bond their sidewalks, street trees. I mean,
That time is the whole
technically-
reason why you bond it.
right, yeah, like this is very normal. Everybody does this. I would not recommend setting this precedent.
And we have an alternative view.
The reason that, and I won't say just this developer, but almost all developers would prefer that this was not the fashion, is that it is not the developer who installs the sidewalks or the trees. Those things don't get installed until after the plan is developed, the house is built, and the concrete trucks stop driving through the front yard, and the HVAC guys and everybody else, because you can't install the sidewalk and you can't install street trees until the house is 99% done. So what happens is the developer, fronts this money, puts it in a bond, and it just sits there until, the houses get built. So it just sits there a long time languishing.
You
That
get interest on
responsi-
it, don't you? Don't you get interest on it? The
No.
developer?
No, how do you
We
get
don't
interest?
hold that money.
You don't?
No,
No.
not this amount. No, I mean, if it was like a couple $1,000 escrow note, but I mean, we make them get a bank note.
Yeah, no, there's
Okay.
you're
So-
not making interest. It costs you money because you got to go
Right.
to the bank and borrow that money to put it there, and you're paying for it and it's sitting there. And it just, and the responsibility for that is really put on in the contract between the developer and the builder is put on the builder. So he's the one who's obligated for it. But as RJ said, what you do is what 99% of other municipalities do. It just,
Is there a value to this bond? Do we know the value at this date?
Not yet.
no, but I would think it's in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Yes, between the sidewalk and the street trees, yes.
Can I just ask you, what would be the town's guarantee without the bond that these things would be done?
The position that builders and developers have taken in this argument all along has been, you just don't give the occupancy permit. You have the final control through the occupancy permit process. Somebody wants to, they finish the house and you don't let them move into that house until they've built the sidewalks or done the trees.
That's not how I play that game.
Yeah.
What's that? Makes
It's
you
just
the
that- but I don't, that's not how. I do
Well, and
things.
I don't understand how you would do it anyway, because you're gonna have, your argument is that it's gonna take too long to get all this done. You're gonna be selling houses as you go along.
Yes.
It isn't gonna be that they all end up closing on the same day and you don't get an occupancy permit. So nobody gets an occupancy permit until
No,
it's all
no,
done?
the occupant, if I'm on lot 6. If I was on lot 6, as soon as my house is done on lot 6, I can't move in. I can't move in until the town gives me an occupancy permit. Okay, so what you say is, if you haven't put in your sidewalk and haven't installed your trees, builder, you don't get an occupancy permit. That house sits there. It just, it shifts the time and the obligation, in through moving it from the developer to the builder. It's what it's doing.
And so let's say that lot 6 doesn't develop.
Yep.
You don't have a sidewalk. You've got a gap.
Yep. Could sit there for a while,
Yeah, well, I mean.
but it will sit there for a
you know,
while.
that could be fixed.
Yeah,
though.
exactly.
It will, it,
Come
it
on.
will sit there forever anyway. No builder is gonna go build one sidewalk for lot number 6, but
I think that we should take the recommendation of our engineering firm and our staff. And
There
what
is a
is
set of,
already in our ordinance.
If you put this bond in place for both the developer and the contractor to make sure these things.
That's not-
well, what you've done is, yes,
Yeah.
you make
And-
sure. You
So
put
we
that
just need a
burden
Motion. and a
into,
Okay,
Well-
just to clarify,
Mhm.
the performance bond that we are speaking of is the bond that we can require of developers as part of the planning approval process. So I have no power or authority over a contractor. Right.
No, I understand.
Okay,
And the only authority we have is over the developer.
Right, and the plan we approve.
well, I mean, the contractor, if they do something that is in gross violation of code, we do have authority there, you know, but monetarily, like we.
Yeah, I'm
we
talking about
can- yeah.
financial.
Any other comments on this? So the motion before us, I need a motion
So
to
moved.
approve or reject.
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 Second,
I'm gonna second this.
second from Al.
I just want to be on the record. I think we ought to. If it's performance bond is the normal course of business, we just ought to do it. No offense to any of the developers, but we should protect ourselves in the township. That's our primary responsibility. And I think we ought to do it.
I would,
I appreciate the guy to make the ask.
No argument.
so
Yeah.
we have the motion and a second. All in favor of rejecting?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion is rejected.
That's, I mean, we haven't always done motions in the affirmative here. We usually do with the zoning hearing board though.
Okay.
Yeah, not legally binding here. Okay,
Third,
good question.
tentative motion to recommend to town council that we approve or reject the final subdivision land development application for the Ridge residential plan as submitted by the Ridge Pittsburgh LP. And I would argue with the amendments that Steve is going to give us wording for at some point.
Corbel Steve, not Victor Steve.
Oh, he's gonna-
He perked up for a second.
I bet he did.
Okay. So do we have a motion?
Did you have another amendment you wanted to add?
I would, in addition to the language Steve is talking about to ensure the issue of the property lines. Something to the effect that will at least document the sidewalk issue that was
The
brought up.
permitting and the sidewalk. issue.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, to ensure that if something like with PennDOT goes awry, that there is a payment in lieu of or something of that nature.
So in that case, since Shelley, since you have that particular condition in mind, it would probably make sense for you to make the motion incorporating that.
But we
That's the
need
first.
Steve's language
We
too.
do, well, we do need his help also, but I'm, just because I've got my nifty little motion recording sheet here.
As
and
a separate motion.
no, because then we do have to do the weird sunshine agenda thing. So this would
Right.
be like, you would be making the motion. If we're recommending to approve, to recommend they approve, blah, blah, blah. Conditioned upon, some sort of language addressing the sidewalk.
Yeah, I
And
can speak to it.
whatever the Steve Corbel says, the adverse possession issue perhaps would be addressed as.
Can I just ask a question while she's doing it? Do we assume all the engineering general conditions are included in this approval? Or do we add them?
So you can feel free to add that to the motion. Typical, like, I shouldn't even say typical practice. This is what happens every single time I put these on the council agenda. I always write conditioned upon. Right, yeah, either the engineer's letter or if there's a staff report, I pull them straight from that letter and.
I would feel better if that was in there.
Absolutely, not a problem.
Well, and I'll make a recommendation. Can we just add that to the text of the motions in the future?
general,
So we're not
Yes.
guessing as to what it might be. Okay,
I'll be honest, normally I've kind of started doing that since the sunshine law thing happened, but because I was off last week, I didn't know what things would look like with the engineer's letter, so I left it off.
Okay.
I got this one out early.
Will
Okay.
you be, will Steve be telling us what magic words he's gonna put in?
Well, but listen, my general language would simply be that the plan complies with all town ordinances, regulations, and laws, including but not limited to the adverse possession matter raised by Mr. Wright. And that, I think that's sufficient. And at the end of the day, we'll have a bit of time between now and when council considers us to sort of sharpen that language in any approval letter. And I do agree that it makes sense to also include the condition that they comply with the engineer comment letter.
Figure this would be
Yeah.
the month that I took off my notes.
That condition in, the engineer comment letters has.
Yeah.
Instead of loading up the motion, we already have those issues.
Well,
spelled out.
so these two things that we discussed are not called out in the comment letter because,
Not the two we discussed, right, but there's a whole.
oh, yes, we always,
Okay,
yeah,
yeah.
that's always, yes. Yeah. Okay. So I've got almost everything written down here, but any thoughts on, I mean, I can suggest sidewalk language if you,
What I was quickly going to propose that conditioned upon developer's agreement to make payment in lieu should PennDOT fail to approve the Route 19 sidewalk installation shown on developer's plans. And the only thing, if you want to add in there, would be any, the payment in lieu, any specificity to the payment in lieu based upon the pricing.
yeah, without having the quantities, and at this stage, at least, I'd maybe suggest going with, as approved or as reviewed by the town engineers, because that's usually who we actually have reviewed those quantities and make that recommendation. So that gives us a little more room for them to figure out what's appropriate. Sidewalk. As shown on plans. It's not approved by PennDOT, a fee in lieu acceptable to the town engineer will be implemented. Okay.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Is that an either or? Developer can pay a fee in lieu or.
No,
No.
If PennDOT fails to grant the HOP,
Yeah.
then there'll be a payment.
Right.
That's why I wrote down, I just want to make sure.
Yeah,
good try.
That's a fair question.
no get out of jail free card now.
It's your payment, but not your call.
Gotcha. Good way to put it.
How does that work in terms of motivation between the developer and PennDOT?
Maybe I can answer that for you. The developer. Oh, that's with singles. I think the HOP does go through you, because we're asking for an HOP, not for us, but for your township street.
Yeah, the
Your
town
town
should be the
street.
applicant.
So we prepare it. But you're the applicant, so you control the document. So if you're saying, is there something we could do to tweak it so that we get kicked out by PennDOT? Well, it's really your document. Am I saying that correctly?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, do we have a amended motion?
I think I've got it covered in the margins here.
Go for it.
All right, so we're gonna say that Shelley made that first motion. So what I've got is conditioned upon one, satisfaction of the town engineer's comments in their latest review letter dated, whatever it was. Usually I just say latest review letter, because then that carries forward to the council. Number two, if the sidewalk as shown on plans is not approved by PennDOT, or we could say if PennDOT fails to grant an HOP, not approved by PennDOT, there will be a fee in lieu paid in an amount acceptable to the town attorney and town engineer. And number three, that it complies with all regulations and laws, including but not limited to the issue of adverse possession as raised by Mr. Wright at the town planning commission meeting. Does that sound like it makes sense?
I think it covers the issues.
Do we have to specify the fee in lieu used or dedicated for sidewalk purposes versus just a general fee in lieu paid to the
Well,
town general fund?
you could.
Good point. I think that's what we talked about in the
Yeah,
past.
the only
The i-
fee in lieu that we did for Fastener, we used that
The
language.
the
Yeah.
idea was to, should this, hopefully not, but hope if it should fail, that it would go into the sidewalk.
So I'm gonna say to be used for
Or at least that was
construction,
my intent. in
But you said
raising
that
the issue.
earlier.
pedestrian facilities
Yeah.
elsewhere in the town.
Good point.
I think that's the language we used last time.
All right, we have a motion. We have the reading of a motion, so can someone, because she can't make it, so someone needs to make that motion.
I've got
Shelley-
Shelley as the
Kelly did.
first.
Shelley, you already made the motion?
Yep.
For all items?
Yes,
Yeah.
that,
We were just working out what all
All right.
were included as conditions.
Convoluted, so I'm trying to keep up.
That's what we're here for.
Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion passes with the conditions.
You made it. So, January 23rd work for you? Okay. And then, of course, if council would like to take an additional meeting, then we'll need to talk about an extension, but right now you're good through the 23rd meeting. All right,
We're not going to see you again? You were getting.
Got me next.
Yeah, he's getting up again.
We were
You do have
getting so
PowerPoint
used to
for this
you
one, right?
on Bridge. It was a,
Yes, I'm not.
it was a monthly occurrence.
Yeah.
All right. The next item, number 3, review of the rezoning application for 10-410 and 10-418 Perry Highway and Einhouse Drive to become exclusively C3. Applicant proposes a car dealership, and we talked about this last time, but what additional information do you have for us?
There were a couple of points that were raised and questions, and so I covered those in a PowerPoint, if I could just go through those. And what those questions were, they had us look more closely at what the ultimate construction of the site would be and how we were going to deal with stormwater, landscaping, buffering, and those sorts of things. And I think that's what we've tried to address. So wanted to go into that. Just briefly, if you recall, we were here for the Schultz Ford, which is on the westerly side of 19 and the Wexford Flats Perry Highway, and that their proposed facility for a EV facility would be on the easterly side across the street. Next slide. And that it is for the EV facility to be part of one of the many dealerships that go up and down Perry Highway. Next. The original application had a smaller area, and then when I was here last month, I told you about how we had just modified it to expand the area. The application here just covers that fully to show that the proposed 2.46 acres of current R2 would be rezoned to C3 with this application. Next slide. Again, as I think the term RJ used, that we have a split zoning here between the C3 and the R2. Again, just for reference, if anyone needs to, you can see where the site is outlined in red, and that it is surrounded by C3 on northwest and southwest, and R2 to the east and southeast is the existing zoning. Next slide. At the application last month, we presented this as the prior rezoning concept plan. As a condition in McCandless, we're required to submit a master plan with the rezoning, so you can see what we would propose to develop on the site. This brought about a series of questions, and so we did more detail. Next slide. So, and I think those two issues that were discussed were stormwater runoff and then screening buffering for the existing homes. Next slide. So looking first at drainage. We take our site and we look in really very close micro watersheds. We have 3 watersheds. The very front portion, the yellow, drains directly out to Route 19, just a small portion of it, basically the front yards of the existing buildings. The middle of the site drains in a southeasterly direction and heads toward Einhouse Drive. That's that private street along the bottom there. And then the back portion, the blue area, was thought to have drained, both east and southeasterly. And that's not true. When you go out there and you look at it and you look at the topography of it, it flows directly due east for that. So the house that you see in the lower right-hand corner there on Einhaus does not get directly affected by our runoff. It's not flowing from the blue area. In fact, it's flowing due east. Someone in the past built a diversion ditch, and is the next one detail it? No, I did this before, Chris. Nope, back up one then, sorry. In the easterly end or right-hand side of the blue area, you'll see those three little red arrows. Those show that somebody went in there and constructed a drainage ditch and diverted the water that was coming off this property and kicked it north. And just off of our property is a catch basin. And it's a double-sized beehive type inlet. So it's a well-designed facility. And from that inlet, the water then travels through the blue pipes north along the backs of those houses out to Ashley Hill Court, turns and then runs down and meets Ashley Hill Drive, goes through the storm inlets and then goes into the detention facility. I can only surmise that that was done by Mr. Barrel because Mr. Barrel did the Ashley Hill subdivision. And so he did that because he bought that property so he could expand his car dealership back. And he wanted to make sure that nobody had runoff that went into some of the lots and houses that he was creating. So it's sort of like one of those good deed things. And so that's where the water goes from the blue watershed area.
And that's a town maintained system? A town
I
owned?
have no idea who owns that system.
Figure that out
I'm
relatively
opening the
quickly.
GIS map
Oh, you got it? Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm
Is
not,
it-
yeah, your
Is
screen,
it owned by the town?
now. I'll let you know in a second.
Okay.
Once it loads.
Yeah.
I'm screen sharing, so it's probably better if you're just doing it.
Yeah, it probably is, because I would suspect in the era this was done, it would have been, and it's, again, as I say, it's very well engineered. So, next slide.
Before you go
Oh,
away from that, if
please.
I may, the light blue easterly section that you said drains to the east and then into that blue pipe. That currently is a vegetated property right now. It's not a hard surface, correct?
That area is correct. That's grass.
So now you turn it to a hard surface. Are those pipes and everything still good for that
We don't know
additional?
yet.
Yeah, I can answer that, yes, because you'll see how I've designed the detention facility.
Okay,
We are not allowed by law to increase the runoff from our property.
right.
So whatever is currently flowing to those red arrows and out the pipe, that's already pre-established. So we have to hold back whatever volume is necessary to be no greater than, less or no greater than that volume. And that's not covered under your stormwater management. So I can say, you're not going to let us do so as you enforce the stormwater management. Okay. And you'll see how we've incorporated that stormwater system into the
All right.
design.
I
So,
just got ahead of you.
yeah,
Sorry.
no problem. Next slide.
Before we go,
Oh, sorry.
the northeast corner where that detention inlet is. It looks like it's the same light blue shade as the easterly side of your parcel. Was that done just to highlight it, or is there a claim that that inlet is within the lot area that is under contract for this development?
What we were highlighting in blue was a watershed. We were not showing property ownerships. The ownership line is the red dashed line. Long two dots, two
Okay.
dashes. That's the property line.
So you're just showing basically contours where it would flow.
Yeah, so the blue goes beyond our property line because that's the watershed. All of our water goes down, turns along where the red arrows are and goes northerly, literally about 20 some odd feet into those inlets. Whose property that is I don't know whether it's Mr. Barrels or if it's the rear yard of some of these other houses. Didn't research it, don't know who owns it, but it is not ours. That answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, all right, next. So given that we know that the water is going to go there and that we really don't have any place to discharge on Einhaus because there's no streams or drainage ways there. There's no inlets. There are drainage ways out on Perry Highway, but try not to throw water back onto PennDOT because that. So from our perspective, the ideal world is that we're going to take every bit of our water and take it to the back of the site, put it into a detention facility and release it at a rate that is not greater than what we have today. So we've graded the site out here. We've shown contouring, et cetera. We've basically down at the Einhaus area, we've elevated that. When I went out to the site and really looked at it, I go, oh my goodness, it drops off a lot more than I was really thinking about. So that sort of shortened up some of that area. But basically, we can take all of the water on our parking lots, and the blue arrows show how it's going to flow into our storm pipes, carry it back to our SWM, stormwater management. That's our detention basin. And then out of our basin, we would then discharge into the swale, and from the swale, then it would go into the inlet and carried off toward Ashley Hill Court. So again, the restriction we're going to have is we only have so much water coming off today, and that's what we have to replicate. We have not attempted to engineer that detention facility to be the absolute correct size. We're just saying that's what it's going to be. Is it oversized? Is it undersized? If it's undersized, means we just make it bigger, or we put in underground tanks, very common for commercial facilities. So, but just conceptually, we wanted to say that there would be a form of this, stormwater management before it's released out to the easterly property line.
Question.
Yes.
I'm not a stormwater engineer, but I realize it's trickier because the existing Beehive Inlet is off of your property.
Mhm.
But wouldn't it be the more prudent approach for stormwater management to actually try to figure out who owns it and tie in your detention system into the existing inlet?
That's what he's doing.
No, he's not.
I'm not.
He's
And the reason,
he's releasing it to the existing ditch.
right,
Which goes into that.
which goes into it.
It goes into
And
it, but
You are being quite practical and logical. But I'm not at that level yet. I'm at a rezoning. I'm not at engineering level. But you're absolutely right. The ideal situation is that we would take the pipe from our detention facility and run it right into that beehive. Absolutely. But that's trespassing. I can't do it
no,
until
I understand
somebody
that.
tells me I can do it. But it is certainly something we would explore. But if somebody who doesn't want us to do it says, no, you can't trespass, then no problem. We'll just go into the ditch. So yours is the better solution. We just can't or don't want to tie our hands to that obligation this early in the game. We don't even know if you're going to rezone it yet. So
Right, I get that.
So with those assumptions, next slide, we wanted to also look at, because the detention facility becomes a buffer, if you would, because it pushes things away. And we didn't want to build that detention facility where there's existing trees. You may recall I talked about last month where there was about a 40-foot area there of existing trees. They're not very exciting trees, quite honestly, but they are existing deciduous trees. And so when I've showed them there in the green color, so we've said, okay, we're going to have 40 feet of buffer, keep those existing trees, then we'll build a detention facility. And then what we go on is showing the additional landscaping. And maybe the next slide will show you the detail of that. So if we look at that, again, existing trees, the yellow-green area, stormwater management, and then we put a double row of evergreen trees. I think it's something like a green giant arborvitae would be a really good tree for that location. And then on the parking lot side, we show a 6-foot stockade fence. So again, visual and noise sort of thing, and then said, now we've got our parking lot. So just to show that. Now, a lot of our attention has been to the 2 lots to the right of us. They're on Ashley Hill Drive. Those houses sit about 25 to 30 feet below our property. So even in the second floor of those houses, you don't see, you have to look up to be able to see our area. So they really were sort of well screened already by the facility that's there. But we're going to go further and say, if they do have a peak or a view, then that's why we've gone to the extent that we have. And for the one house on Einhaus, right in the center of the slide bottom, you just see the outline of that house. We have also taken that evergreen along hedgerow along our southerly property line there as well as the stockade fence. So anticipating that, you know, even though we think that house probably is not going to always stay residential, it's the only single family house on a private commercial drive. It's not going to be there forever, but let's respect it for now and just show it be buffered.
Can I ask why the fence and the proposed planting line isn't east of your stormwater facility so you can maintain it a little easier? Why are you leaving just the natural vegetation, which is deciduous and not all that great?
Sure. It is, I have seen many people attempt it. It is not possible to grow evergreen trees in a deciduous forest. So if I was to lie to you and have said, oh, within that 40 foot of green, we're going to put a whole bunch of evergreen trees, they wouldn't live.
I guess I wouldn't have defined that as a forest. When I
Well,
drove by, it didn't quite
within that
look like a
deciduous-
forest.
Deciduous planting,
Okay,
let's put it that way, that deciduous plant, the evergreen trees would not have survived.
so how
So-
deep are you anticipating that your stormwater facility might be, and how would you protect it from anybody wandering into it? If it were,
Oh.
if it had water in it?
These facilities typically are 6 to 8 feet max. And I'm assuming you make us put a fence around it.
If that's the
Yeah,
code
usually.
requirement.
Well, that was my question. So the fence is on the other side of it, so.
Oh, but
Well,
my fence is not for stormwater security purposes. That fence is so that
For
nobody on
I
that
understand.
side can see our
I understand.
parked
I'm
cars or
just
hear the
thinking you
noise
could-
or whatever.
yeah, so why not extend it is what you're
Yeah,
asking.
yeah.
I mean, and I know we've kind of referenced this, but I think it's important to remember that this is
It's only zoning.
a
Yeah.
concept plan,
Yeah.
so therefore we have not reviewed any
Yep.
of the proposal
Yep.
Yeah.
compliance.
And if during site planning, you say, you know, cut the existing trees down and plant the evergreens here, fine. I mean, we've got a long way to go
Yeah.
before we get to that detail.
Can we go back to the prior slide? Are you proposing then with the way you're looking at grading of the site, you would not have any access to Einhaus, or are you proposing access to Einhaus?
We have never shown, even in last month's slide, and definitely with this month's slide, we are not. We're elevating that portion of the property so that we can then drain it to the easterly end of the
Just
property.
wanted to get it on the
Yeah.
record. Thank you.
And the drawing, I think if you zoom in,
No,
it's pretty
from this
clear.
drawing, I could see that. The previous
yeah.
drawing, not so much.
yeah, now both of them had no access to Einhaus. We want nothing to do with Einhaus. It is in horrible shape.
It's a
Prove it.
scary intersection, yeah.
Well, not only an intersection, just the roadway. We want,
The road's caved in
oh,
3/4 of the way down.
I drove through there, but I didn't like to drive through there. It was not,
I didn't go in very
I
far.
mean,
yeah, I wouldn't recommend it.
how much what's the elevation gonna be post? Once you elevate this, how much, because that thing's
Yeah, the drive now is pretty steep.
pretty steep grade there.
I'm not sure where you're talking about.
On the bottom of the T, going to Einhorn,
Yes,
Einhaus, did you say you were gonna
That's-
elevate that?
yeah, that's, we threw about 15 feet of, I think there's about 15 feet of fill there. These are 1 foot contours, so
Okay.
yeah. It's confusing sometimes because sometimes we use 2 foot contours as opposed to ones, but these are ones and there's about 15 lines right there. Yep.
And I know this is preliminary, but please do not plant arborvitae. Those are deer catnip.
Yeah,
No, I said green giant arborvitae.
They don't like those?
They do not.
Has anybody told the deer that?
What do you
Yes.
have?
Yeah,
at your
they do not.
house? You have
Um,
arborvitae, don't you?
No.
oh, the
They're
deer
much
love
like
the
the
arborvitae,
ones
no
they
doubt about it.
I
If
took a picture.
the green giant is not eaten by
I
the
didn't
deer.
know that. Whatever is deer resistant, please.
It's the
Alright.
green giant.
Thank you.
If you ever want to see some really great green giants, I was pointing out to my wife, we were driving over here. She's not back yet. She dropped me off and she'll be coming back hopefully to pick me up. But when you go
Sorry to say I
west
don't
of
have a sleeping
Ingomar,
bag. I should.
and there's that Lutheran church. You know where I'm talking about?
Yeah.
And you go up and over and the road makes a little bend and you come to a three-way T. On the left there, the guy's planted probably 10 of them there. They're at this point, probably 20 feet tall. They're really solid.
Okay.
Yeah, they're a great plant.
I didn't know that. Did you know that, Jack, for our deer programs? Did you?
I think we might have them in the,
Well, whatever is deer resistant, that's all I'm,
yeah.
Yeah, we agree.
all right,
If-
thank you.
To circle back on the storm water in this area, so our GIS is showing that there are town-owned storm systems back there, and that inlet is a town-owned inlet.
Ah,
And this discharges into the Ashley Hills Basin, which is also owned and maintained by the town.
yes, which I confirmed last week.
Okay.
So,
When we get to that level of engineering, we will come back to you and ask if you have additional capacities. From a capacity point of view, we have an obligation from an infiltration point of view to do it on our own property. But when I saw how this was done and that somebody directed our water into it, there may have built into it that additional capacity for us. So our facility may not have to be as large from a volume. Infiltration is different, but from a volume point of view, we want to have that discussion with you
Yeah, that would be
way down
good.
the road.
Yeah, especially with that existing facility being publicly owned and maintained, and this would be private, so we'll have to definitely take that kind of into conversation there, but.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, any more on your overall concept?
That was it on the site plan and just next slide just repeats what we were asking to do.
Okay. Well, a lot of good information there, but what is before us this evening is the rezoning. Before we get to a motion and a vote, is there public comment? There's nobody online, I presume.
just our consultants.
Okay. All right. So I need a motion and to either,
I have a question. for
all right.
Archie.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Does our ordinance say anything about split zoning? And how it's addressed?
Wouldn't that be nice?
Doesn't it say something that so many feet back, you can assume that the other,
You're throwing me a curveball. I might have just lied.
I mean, normally a zoning will address if a property boundary
I,
cuts a zoning district, if a zoning district cuts a property boundary, that's so many feet into the less restrictive. But it doesn't typically,
I love this because our consultants have poured over the code. Carolyn, am I interpreting your comment correctly that you're saying no?
no,
It doesn't address it?
okay.
I have never seen a zoning code address what to do with a split zone lot. It's an administrative policy that you just have to figure out the best approach, basically, in the ones that I've encountered.
Thank goodness. So
I mean,
Yeah,
I have seen ordinances that
that
do that, but
interesting.
if ours doesn't, then.
I have too.
I've never read it in here. What I will tell you is the way that Bruce has always dealt with it is he just pretends like it's a property line, basically, and you take the setback from where the zoning district changes.
So it doesn't address it.
There will be no split zoning in the new code. Don't worry.
Any other comments from the commission?
I guess I have one more to the applicant.
Sure.
In terms of this proposed use, is this the I understand the rezoning is separate from potential use, but for the EV facility, is there anywhere else that Schultz has looked at in that vicinity as a potential location that already would have the zoning in place or would fit the size? I mean, isn't there an abandoned dealer near the Lincoln dealer on the North Allegheny tennis court side?
Not that I'm aware of, and I don't know that.
I mean, I don't know how big it needs to be just in terms of, I think that there's some abandoned car dealership building.
It used to be.
Used to be Saturday, right?
Saturday, maybe that was.
Oh, yes, that's a fill site right now. It hasn't, no.
I'm
I'm
just
just
wondering if
laughing
there's any
because I'm very-
alternative that, versus.
That would be interesting.
Versus the rezoning that, that's under consideration.
I think that when the property came for sale and it was marketed as being commercial, they were very pleased to know that it was, just across the street from their existing facility, which had definite advantages to them. And so that's why they were attracted to this. Only when we got into it, and I pointed out to them that we had this zoning, that we had this.
Any others? All right. And since no public comment, I think we're open for a motion to approve or reject the rezoning of this property. Can I have a motion to approve? From Shelley,
I second.
second from Al, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. It's
All right.
rezoned.
Well,
It's
It's
approved.
recommended.
It's recommended.
duly advertised already. We'll be sending those notices out within probably the beginning of next week.
Thank you very much.
Ooh, Chris, you sent me the draft for that, but please, like, put that on our list that we need to knock those letters out and actually send them,
Yes.
because busy week.
Yes.
Who is our town liaison these days?
Well, they haven't
Town council.
officially appointed one yet.
Oh, I didn't know whether it was Jack.
Since Kim has now, you know that, right?
Right.
Okay, sorry, I'm just sorry. Jason's our alternate. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
He was here last time, but
yeah.
and Jack was here this, time. I didn't know if they were here for official.
Because I
Okay.
was assuming Jason probably was traveling or something, but I
Down by.
will find out
Okay, I just didn't know.
either the 9th or the 20th, because they're gonna appoint someone.
All right. All right, number 4 is the item on our agenda, discussion with the zoning salvo modernization consultants on the revised drafts.
All right.
I don't know how we go about this, to be honest with you.
Yeah, so we've got a couple people on here.
We only got the zoning though, right? We didn't get Saldo.
So
I didn't see a salvo.
I just, well, Kathy, who's also on the call, transmitted to an updated draft Friday. I have not reviewed it yet.
Okay.
I just got back in the office today, but I threw it in the Dropbox so you all have access to it. But
When?
it's
Yeah, I didn't.
now, like
Oh.
an hour and a half ago.
Oh, okay. No,
Yeah,
it wasn't there
like,
today.
I'm telling you now.
Okay.
That has been added by me today, since that's
All
when
right.
I saw it. So, and I kind of just skimmed through it. I didn't really fully get the chance to,
Yeah, I don't see
read
it,
over any of the
but
changes,
there now.
but.
I got the wrong one.
We've got Carolyn, who I
Well,
believe
I've
you
got
all
her
have
old
met
email,
on Zoom
so
before,
it's probably.
at our
Yeah.
prior discussions, and also Kathy. Warozdik, did I say it right?
Saldo. Came in.
Okay.
Oh,
Yeah.
there.
The WY is silent, so it's just Rosdick.
Wait, really? How
Yeah,
is this gonna come up? All right. Just kidding. It's just Kathy Rosdick.
All right.
that's Kathy Rosdick, sorry.
Wow. All right. Well, I guess this is how you know that I've only ever just called her Kathy. So Kathy has joined the, I don't think you all have gotten to talk to her directly before this meeting, but she joined our team to be our primary Saldo code writer. She has a lot of really great practical experience administering planning and zoning codes up in Erie for several years. You worked at both the county and then started the city department. Is that correct?
That's right.
Yeah, so she's got some good saldo cred. So we've got both of them here. Of course, your zoning code questions, Carolyn will be the primary, person to direct those to. Kathy for the saldo side. I'm here in a support role, basically. But Carolyn, did you have any particular way you wanted this to flow, or are we just gonna wing it?
Yeah, and I just had a few like opening remarks, and then we can just go from there. Essentially, so.
Yeah.
So I did want to thank everybody for the comments that you sent us. They were really a lot of really great content in what you shared. And so basically like there was too much for us to go like line by line tonight through all of your comments. So I just wanted to give kind of like a general overview. Essentially, like any of the points where you pointed out that there were grammar issues or wording that wasn't quite clear. I think generally across the board, we accepted those and made modifications accordingly. Some other frequent comments were questions about why the specificity in certain areas. In particular, a couple that came up recurringly were the communication tower wireless facilities, the oil and gas development section, adult establishment and firearms. And the intent behind having the detailed regulations is because if we didn't have that, then these would be uses not listed that somebody could come in, apply for them to be anywhere and not have set criteria for how to review those. So we see this as providing support for the town to restrict and limit these uses that can be nuisance for other properties within the town. And several of these sections had recently been developed or redeveloped by the town within the last, I think, 2 or 3 years. RJ was basically the time frame. Any big sections that like the oil and gas, we pretty much left it alone. We didn't make any substantial changes. If I saw a missing period or something like that, I may have made some minor grammar corrections, but the content we kept intact from what was worked out in the past couple of years.
Yeah, and to that point, there were some questions about definitions.
Yes.
And so, related to the oil and gas issue, the way that the code is written currently, and we had worked with our prior town attorney, so not Steve on the line with us now, but it was Gavin, if any of you remember back then. The way that we handled that at the time was they put the definitions that were oil and gas, directed straight in that amendment section. That was just the formatting preference, I guess. At that point, we hadn't really discussed that we were, for sure going to be doing this project. And that was just kind of how those big amendments had been done in the past. So I think they just kept going with it. Something that Carolyn did, pretty much the only thing that we touched about oil and gas was pulling those out of sort of that floating use regulation section and putting them in the general definitions. As a result of that, there are a couple things like Brendan, I was reading through, the comments that you had sent me earlier today, I think. And you had quite a few that were like, what, what's up with this drilling thing? It's kind of vague. Or those were the definitions that came straight from oil and gas. So, maybe there's a little bit of context that we can add to those couple that are kind of like, well, why doesn't this include water? Or, well, why is this operator written like this? But those are all the same definitions that were vetted by this group when we originally did the ordinance. Yeah, you had the, well, of course,
well, operator and
but
drilling and
those definitions again, those are taken from the ordinance that we were all commenting. So, you
But there's no
know,
reason we can't change it.
right. However, if we really get into the nitty gritty, particularly of oil and gas or 5G, but what if we tweak this or that? Because those amendments were done so recently with this group, they were not included as a rewrite in the scope of this project. So maybe it would be appropriate as like a tune-up after this overarching project closes, but I don't think they're so material that we're going to put ourselves in like a really bad position if a development happens to come through in the meantime.
And I did double check the definitions that were specific to the oil and gas, just to make sure we weren't using those words in relation to other types. So I believe it was a comment that came from multiple commissioners was regarding a well, that a well can be for more than just oil or gas. It could also be a water well, for instance. But I did check those definitions to make sure that we're not using the term well elsewhere in the code to mean a water well, that the only instances of it in the zoning ordinance are for the oil and gas. So I did do that check. And the well operator, that was another one that initially it was used throughout the oil and gas section as well operator or just straight up operator. But we use operator in a different way elsewhere in the code. So I went through and added well operator in front of each instance that's specifically referring to that definition, the oil and gas definition of operator. So we did make some adjustments like that to make sure that those definitions are not causing conflict with the rest of the code.
Well, a couple of comments on.
Oh,
things-
wait, I don't know. I
sorry.
kind of jumped in there, Carolyn. I'm not sure.
Oh, if you
still
guys
have a
wanna
couple
go.
things you wanted to touch on, sorry.
I mean, those are the main overarching kind of comments that I wanted to share. I'm sure you have questions for me that we can get into some of the more specific areas. And I did want to offer Kathy, if you had any statement like that regarding the saldo that you wanted to share as well.
Sure. Thanks, Carolyn. A couple of things there's a lot to go over. I don't think we can get it all done in one evening. So there's a lot of comments that RJ has made on the saldo that I've incorporated. And I think RJ, when I sent it back to you, there's probably 20 items that we still need to discuss and finalize between your comments. Generally, as I received comments from the Planning Commission, there was a lot of questions because the definition section had not been completed yet. So I think once you get that section and able to review it in context of the rest of the saldo, it'll become more clear and answer a lot of the questions that you had. Same with Carolyn, as you pointed out, inconsistencies or conflicts or typos. Sometimes there was duplicates. I was able to incorporate those comments pretty easily. And then anywhere there was a suggestion to expand a regulation or retract a regulation, I put that as a note to review with staff because I don't want to make that change without having a larger conversation about that. We got a good handful of those. What I was going to suggest to help with the discussion about and my response to your comments is I did make a reply in the documents that you sent. So if you had a comment, I replied to that comment so you could see what I did or what I wasn't able to do, or maybe clarified a question you had. So RJ, I was going to share that with you and you can share it with the Planning Commission members who did provide that so you can kind of see. So we don't have to necessarily go over all of those comments in one sitting. But if you want to look through that, that might be helpful. One thing, and I'll turn it back over to Carolyn. One thing I wanted to make sure that we went over that I thought it was really important with the Planning Commission tonight is the procedures, the site plan. There was a lot of questions about how do we handle site plans, which are essentially sketch plans, minor plans, major. We've actually incorporated a classification of major land development for McCandless because there was you tend to want to see developments happen instead of a two-step process, you want those two steps, the preliminary and final, to be combined in most cases. But we still needed two separate steps for larger phase projects. So I did want to touch on that, make sure that we're all in agreement on how we're going to handle the different tiers of review. Because I think essentially that's really, what's could bog you down, and want to make sure that's clarified. Another thing you'll see, and I think it's gonna be a follow-up conversation, is with buffering. You had fairly complex buffering standards, and as you may remember, zoning and Saldo were essentially joined in one unified document. Now we've split them into two separate sections of the code. But buffering was probably one of the biggest challenges, is trying to make your buffering standards what you need them to be, impactful, but concise and easy to administer. That's one of the things that I look at, having sat in RJ's position and many times up where you are. You have staff, certain staff limitations. You don't want to make things so onerous that it's hard for the staff person to understand what's being required, and equally the difficulty for developers to understand what's required of them. And we kind of saw that with the buffering standards. So we tried to make them more uniform, more concise, and easier to implement. So again, we won't go over those specifically, but that's something that you'll see in the Saldo. It was in your last draft, and I'm sure there'll be more conversation about that. But before the end tonight, I certainly do want to come back to the procedures discussion and make sure that that's clarified, because that's probably one that we've been back and forth a little bit, and I want to make sure we have it pretty solid in the final draft that you get. This has been reviewed. The Saldo has been reviewed by your engineer, and I've incorporated all of his comments. And in the end, of course, it will be reviewed by your town attorney, who may have additional comments as well. So that has yet to be done. But the outstanding items really is the definitions, which I said hopefully will clarify a lot once you receive those, and that'll be the next iteration of the draft that you receive later on.
And I want to jump in and say, regarding the buffer yards in particular, like that's a really good call out. Honestly, I think that was one of the first things I tabbed the zoning book for when I got here. There's about 4 different sections you have to bounce between right now to figure out what on earth you're supposed to plant in between a building and your, in a house. So, there's going to be less in terms of charts compared to what you're used to, but I really do think that the function is going to be significantly improved. Also, and I'll talk about this a little more once we get to the procedures section in Kathy's overview. But there is a little bit of, particularly for the members who have been here for a while, there's probably going to be a little bit of terminology confusion. Bruce historically had referred to any land development that did not include a subdivision as a site plan application. And that is not necessarily typical for how things are called and dealt with in other communities in the MPC, whatnot. That's more like this major land development function. And if it's including a subdivision, then it's a major subdivision / land development. So when you hear the word site plan in that discussion, you may think, something like any of the major commercial developments that we've just seen. That is not the way that terminology is going to be used going forward. That way it's a little more standardized. So I'm going to ask you to hold that information in your brain and try and follow along with us. But, we'll talk a little bit more about sort of where we've been versus where we're going when we get to that portion.
Kathy, can I just ask, one of my biggest concerns, and I've raised it with both documents, is that definitions aren't consistent. Are they now consistent between the two and also throughout the document? So we don't refer to a home as opposed to a single family dwelling or whatever. There's the definitions in the Saldo that we did get already didn't match the definitions in the zoning for the same terms necessarily.
Right. And you bring up a good point. And that had not been done yet when you saw the last draft, but it will be. So this draft that you see now, I've removed all the definitions because what you saw was sort of old placeholders that had not been compared to the zoning yet. So that I saw that caused a lot of confusion. So I just removed it completely. But I will do
From
that.
an administration standpoint, really more of that. Did we drop home everywhere? Please tell me you took home out.
I didn't, but I can,
So we
No,
can,
no, no, we're referring to like somebody's home that they,
okay.
so
yeah,
rather than a dwelling or a, it's not defined, so just.
right,
a
yeah, I
pet
mean,
Peeve.
okay.
Comments? I mean, I've got some.
Why,
Is
yeah,
it
why
time?
don't we, how about we kind of do your normal thing where we sort of go in
Well-
some sort of order?
Well, I guess that's my initial comment. Are we gonna go through everybody's comments tonight? That can't be possible.
No, Carolyn and I scheduled an 8-hour day to do that, so no.
Actually, it was 2.5
No,
8 hours.
yeah, my bad, that was actually
When did you schedule that?
during our normal working hours,
So you've already done it?
yes.
Well, when are we, if we don't go through all of our comments tonight, which I can't imagine we will, how are we going to understand what you thought of our comments, what you did about our comments, why you did or did not accept our comments, things like that?
So this is why previously I had said, let's come in with the things that really, we're chewing on, they're on our mind, they're a big deal. Like, we are not going to go through comments like, why so many lists?
That's me.
Yes, that is you. That's why.
And I've got an argument for that, and I'll give
It
it.
doesn't matter. I don't want to be in another situation where impacts has a successor coming in, and because we have not very clearly defined what uses fall under retail, under
Well,
service, under this and that me or the next zoning officer gets whacked because we let something go in because we had unclear code and we're expected to make a subjective decision. That's why those are important.
the flip side of the argument against a list of 40 items is that someone can argue that if you took the time and effort to list all of those items, then you did not intend to include the one thing I want to do. And therefore it's permitted because it's not excluded.
That's not.
No, it's
how
not
that
permitted
works.
because it's not. listed.
But also, that
You said-
decision ultimately falls to the zoning officer on interpretation, and if they don't agree with my interpretation, they can take it to the zoning hearing board.
Okay, I've been in situations
It
where,
is a useful administrative tool.
Yeah.
I am saying this is the person that administers this code.
Yeah, more specificity is always good from a use and a definition standpoint. and
But
so on.
my point right now is not to start going through these explicit comments so much as to say, no, it would not be possible and within the scope of this project's budget to individually go through every single comment. That is why I've asked everyone to keep in mind their big picture things, the things that they really care about, that have really stuck with them, take a look at the document. We've passed it out. If there's something that from your prior notes, which I assume you all have, you wanted to check and see how it shook out, you have both documents to compare. I do want to remind everyone that our legal requirement for the MPC is to deliver you the entire document as a whole and give you the opportunity to make a recommending vote to town council. We have taken every effort to provide a couple chapters 1 month at a time so that everyone really had the time to get into it because that was important to this group. But at some point, we have to hit our deadlines. And the platform that we are using to roll out the public engagement for this project expires in June. So we need to get to town council, have a public hearing and have them have a chance to make an opinion by June, which is 3 months longer than this project was scoped. So keeping that in mind, we will try to hit everything that we can tonight.
I have no comments because I think that's an improper and inefficient way of going forward. So my comments, I have none.
Well, what would you like to specifically bring up?
Nope, I'm not going to do it because I probably have 75 or 80 comments and I'm not going to go through them. There's no time to go through them. And I think they have validity. But obviously, when presented and questioned and asked, they were not addressed. They were not just in
So
the
you-
definition section, I had 15 definitional issues. Not one was changed or
So you
addressed.
have reviewed the new code and compared it to the
Yes.
comments and none of them were incorporated.
Yes, correct.
Not a single one.
Here's a list of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12.
Out of every single one of the comments you made on every document, we did not address a single one.
No,
That's
no,
what
no.
you're saying.
I just picked the definition section. There are other, these are all my comments. I don't want to take everyone's time to go through my individual comments. I think they're valid. They were not addressed. They were not implemented. Whether they were addressed, changed, understood, questioned, are any of the above. But they currently were not, most of them were not changed. And so I don't know whether they were understood or just that I'm dead wrong. And I may be, but I surely would have liked to have had that discussion at some point in my life.
That is the point of
That's the
why
point of
we
tonight.
have brought the consultants here.
And
So if there are ones specifically you would like to go over, this is the scheduled time to do so. What would you like to discuss?
I defer to my fellow commissioners. I am not going to go through that process. Sorry.
Okay, I would like to make this a productive meeting for everyone. I'm a little confused because you have requested that we go through this process and then stated that you are not going to. So
If-
how
if
can we make this
This,
work?
I've got an hour's worth of comments at least. And I do not believe that, and I suspect everybody else has comments. And so it might be very quickly answered, it might not be, but I can't imagine that we can tonight, starting at 20 minutes to 9, go through everybody's comments that are needed to discuss this document fully. I just can't imagine. And it was mentioned by one of the two ladies that, well, we will have further discussions. I don't know when the further discussions are even possible. They're not scheduled for us, with us. Are they not?
We spent the meeting budget on more discussions in 2022 in the middle of the year than we had scheduled because we had wanted to spend the bulk of our meeting time in the allotted budget on this stage. However, we brought the consultants in the spring because there were concerns that you all were not being involved enough. So we tried to address those as best we could. We had a small
There
group
was no
meeting outside
text.
of the meeting.
There was no text to review
There
at
was
that
no
time.
text to review because we were 3 to 4 months of the project,
Right.
which is why I had expressed at that time that you would all get to see every single comma and letter of this document once we had drafted the code. However, at that time, the members that were present on this commission were still concerned and wanted to talk to the consultants directly. So we spent the project budget on that up front. So we are trying to be efficient with the time and labor hours that we have left at this meeting.
Can I jump in?
Please.
Please.
So this is not a granular detail issue. It goes to some of the comments that I had raised, which I think are more rubber meets the road kind of particular land uses, particular districts, identification of certain uses as conditional uses, special exceptions. I don't know if we've got permitted uses by right with condition in there. I don't recommend whether we have it or not, but I'll just say conditional uses and special exception. Do those get tabletopped out in terms of a hypothetical applicant comes in, proposes a special exception or a conditional use at a particular location in the town? And there's, as part of the ordinance drafting process, there's a pretty much a walk it through, consider the application, consider what the criteria we have require, and to determine whether the criteria specified for that particular use are, number one, objective and specific, such that the applicant could and would actually, in court, be required to show that the land use application satisfies that. And then secondarily, that whatever conditions or criteria we have associated with a conditional use or special exception are really what the town would believe to be necessary for the health, safety, and welfare. Because, I mean, in the Sheets deal was before my
Mhm,
time here.
mhm.
But, you know, in like my day job.
Can I just ask which sheets? I'm sorry.
The one on Perry.
The one on Perry
Yeah.
High.
I see
6 sheets
CC.
across from the old sheets.
Yeah.
that created
Yeah.
many problems.
Which is now a smoke shop, yeah.
Yeah.
So my experience, the issue is always that when there is some type of use that has got some degree of public pushback and it's a conditional use or it's a special exception, it's only then that there's a realization that the criteria in the ordinance aren't really good, they're not really enforceable, they're not really specific, and they don't really do anything other than require the applicant to provide a bunch of paperwork that once they provide the paperwork, they satisfied all they were supposed to do. Versus actual criteria saying, you know, you have to objectively meet X, Y, and Z, which are tangible. So the long way around that question is, has there been an exercise that's been done
Thank you so
to take some of these land uses that are identified and to work it through and to say, we've got a gap here associated with shooting ranges. In terms of what criteria an applicant may actually have to present us with, so that whether it's town council or whether it's the zoning hearing board can actually look at it and say, yes, satisfying these criteria allow us to conclusively make this determination that this is compatible with the health, safety, and welfare. Has that been done, or will that be done associated with, you know, not every single use, but a potpourri of different uses to make sure that we're not just essentially putting in a variety of criteria that are part of what you have to submit as part of your application versus getting a witness or an expert to come here and say, yeah, this is, you know, this is how loud this is actually going to be and here's why, or something else.
I have some thoughts, but Carolyn, do you want to go first? Or do you want me to throw those out there first?
I mean, I'm happy to go in either order. If you want to take the lead, that's fine.
Maybe I'll just give a little bit of historical context for at least what I've seen done with these applications before. Because I think the only one that we've had since I've been here was that billboard, which did have very explicit criteria, whether they were objective or, you know, but
that is part of the issue,
but
because if they're not
Yes.
objective, they're.
didn't write
worthless.
that one. But so let's knock out the special exceptions because that one is probably pretty brief. I think there's only one or two instances which we may have carried over into this code from the existing one, where a special exception is like, go to the zoning hearing board for this specific thing for a special exception. And I want to say that's like security fencing around pools. So or like if the topography of the lot or something is such that, you know, you could put your 6-foot max fence right here, but then somebody could just hop over it, you know, and like a ridge behind, then the zoning hearing board is allowed to authorize higher security fencing based on that, like the unusual condition of the site. And we kept that because, you know, as you well know, because you do this, but so, you know, the burden of proof is not such that you have to prove a hardship in that particular situation. Other than that, I think we really only use the special exception function for uses not listed. So there are not additional criteria that I can think of in that. The conditional uses, and Carolyn's probably going to know off the top of her head a little better, maybe where we use these. It's been a while. Like that chapter we drafted, I think back in September or something. But I know like a lot of the alcohol and drinking related uses, especially the ones that are in the districts that might back up more into a neighborhood, like we put a condition on that, you know, I think it was like they needed to close by 10 p.m. or 11 or something.
Mhm.
The reason that we considered that is because going back to Sheets, I remember when we had the liquor license transfer approval, like that was something that council really cared about, was having things quiet down outside at an earlier time because they were right up against houses. So that was a suggestion from me for, I think like in the, what is it, MN, the neighborhood mixed use. to have that be the conditional use criteria. Other than that, historically, what I've seen is certain uses were listed as conditional use so that they would trigger a public hearing and there would be a more extensive public process for that use, which might be objectionable. Not so much that we even put an objective or specific criteria in that, but just said this is something that goes through the conditional use process. Other than maybe some of the really tricky ones like firearms or whatever, maybe tattoo parlor. I'm not sure that we use that technique much, but that seems to historically have been the preference for why we listed something as a conditional use. So it's kind of like a philosophical question on the use of that designation, but that's at least how we as a municipality have been used to using it.
I'll let Carolyn go.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we have enough uses that are conditional uses that I can't say off the top of my head that across the board I did this particular approach. But generally, like we did go through and look at the conditions, make sure that that they are objective. I do know, I don't remember if it was specifically for a conditional use or a special exception or permitted with conditions use, but there were definitely a few that had no bones to them. And so we removed any that just was basically fluff taking up space. Ones that we did keep, for instance, the tattoo parlor and the firearms that have come up in this conversation. We have a very objective measure of separation from other uses that the applicant has to prove. I don't know, another comment that you brought up was, having proof that, for instance, that something is really going to have this level of noise versus that level of noise. I don't remember off the top of my head if any of the uses that we have as conditional uses has a noise condition on it. But my general approach and the approach of our best practices model would be to, if it was a noise limitation, there would be a specific criteria that the applicant would have to prove through documentation. It's in my experience, it's not common to bring in an expert witness for that, but it could be something that if the council is not satisfied with the evidence that's provided, they could ask for additional documentation. Or
I think with the noise levels, like what I've at least seen happen here is it's not so much like, you walk in with your whole land development application and say, and we're going to be at this exact decibel level from the, but more so, they might be like, they might add a sound wall. I mean, not that I've seen a sound wall here, but in theory, like these are the things we're doing to control the noise. And then if it's too loud, or somebody thinks it is, that's a complaint-based response where, we get a decimeter, send the code enforcement officer out to check it out, and would deal with it through the enforcement process. Because I'm not, at least from the scope that I see here, like I think that the noise-based restriction, like the utilities and oil and gas, and we just haven't had any of those come through yet.
So, but correct me if I'm wrong, the way I read the code, and I challenged it, but the way I'm reading it is that most of the conditions that would have to be met are actually in part of the definition in the district. So there are some very specific items that are listed for certain uses that would apply to what you're saying. So it isn't as loosey-goosey. So for instance, if you're looking at a medical marijuana dispensary, there's like 6 different things listed under that use definition in that district table that says this is what a medical marijuana dispensary is and what it needs to be to meet our definition those are the things we would apply when looking at the application. Because
Yeah,
otherwise it's
right.
not meeting
Yeah,
our.
then it's an unlisted use or
Exactly.
one that doesn't qualify.
So I think there are a number of, am I reading it wrong, Carol? That's what I kind of got you were trying to do is identify.
Yeah, and that it's, you have the use name, then you have the use definition, and that's immediately followed by the use criteria. So yes, that is, if there are numbered items underneath the definition of a use, those are the conditions that have to be met in order for that use to be approved.
Well, I don't know that we've hit them all, but that's the approach that's being taken.
Mhm. But that's
Um,
not what we would have listed as a conditional use in terms of triggering the public hearing for all of them,
Oh,
right?
no,
Or am I talking about, or am I sort of,
I'm
talking
looking
about-
at, you've got a
oh,
use
you mean things that are
regulation,
marked actually is.
conditional use.
Gotcha, okay, okay.
Yes,
Yeah, I mean,
those are the criteria that if I'm reading the
Okay.
code, I'm looking at, you
Yes.
gotta meet these criteria
yes,
to be a conditional use approvable by the.
yes.
And
Sorry,
then-
I got confused there.
Okay,
You're right.
okay.
And I don't take issue with that or what's been identified or the philosophical approach that the town has taken previously.
Mhm.
I guess the question then becomes, since we're redoing the zoning now, does the prior philosophical, hey, this may be some degree of a controversial use, we'll identify it as a conditional use, so that way there's, a hearing before the planning commission, there's one or more public hearings before town council, so people can come and say their piece, provides a little bit of cover for everybody, it's not an administrative thing. I understand that.
Mhm.
But since we're doing this new thing now, the question I have is whether, are we still just gonna go through that rote
Like, do
process
we
for the
really
sake
want
of
that? Yeah.
having a process? Or do we do it for the sake of having a process, but because we've identified specific conditions and criteria that actually have to get met? Because my concern is that, well, we'll just say that this is a conditional use. And it's the sheets, which is before my time. It's the indoor firing range, which for
We
reasons
may have
beyond
kept
me.
gas stations as a special exception use. That might
I
be the
don't
one
remember
thing
that.
that carried over. Someone please check that because that was a weird thing about the old code. That jogged me, but
Because the issue is
it's a
whenever
really
something
good
comes up,
question.
the problem is there's a public hearing
Drive through.
and someone says, I don't want this here, there and everywhere, and it's a big problem. And the ordinance may not provide
Mhm.
sufficient objective criteria that if it was not satisfied would be a defensible basis to deny the application. Because then you're just left with a hearing and it's, hey, this is all well and good. They, met the couple criteria, they've satisfied the burden. This is presumptively compatible with the health, safety, and welfare. And then it goes to the objectors to meet a much higher burden
Right.
of establishing that the proposed use is going to have an impact greater than that use
I
would be
mean,
expected to have. Which
yeah.
is something really hard to do. So then you have a hearing for the sake of a hearing, but not an actual airing of whether this use that's been identified for closer scrutiny,
Mhm.
is there actual closer scrutiny applied? That something can be done about versus, hey, we're here for the public hearing, let's have our 2 cents. They submitted an application, they checked a couple boxes. They said they'll, close by 10, they'll do something else, they'll put an American flag out. Anyone else have something to say? Because that to me is a lot more of a feel good versus an actual. This use requires closer scrutiny. Here's why, and those considerations are enumerated here
Mhm.
that you applicant have to meet to show entitlement to the use. Now, I'm not saying that the proposal is devoid of it.
Mhm.
My question is just more in the machinations of how that comes about to try a worst case scenario that someone says, hey, we want to put in a new indoor firing range
Yes.
somewhere. And then you say, all right, this is what they have to show as part of their application.
So
I'm now going to sit on the town side and say, boy, is this enough that satisfying A, B, C, and D will convince me that this is going to be presumptively compatible with the health, safety, and welfare?
So funny that we picked that specific example because that's kind of it's like a weird one for this particular question. But I mean, it's one that's been a controversy that people are probably interested in. So what the heck, we might as well explicitly talk about it. We actually, prior to probably most of our time, I don't know, around when impacts was coming in, the town adopted an ordinance outside of the zoning code under the purview of the police chief that has a bunch of, I mean, what I would probably call objective criteria, but it's not in the zoning code. For safety procedures and training and documentation, and all of these things that they have to provide the police chief, who then reviews that information and issues their firing range permit. And so to get the zoning approval, you have to comply with.
So it's like a license almost.
It essentially is. They pay,
Yeah.
$100 a year
Yeah.
to renew. That is not part of this code, so that is not up for, that particular
Right.
thing is not in these drafts or up for consideration. But I mean, like, other than that, oil and gas, which I mean, we have how many pages long of. Which I saw your comment, it was like express criteria, but are they, but again, we didn't intend to mess with that too much since we just had done it, but. Yeah, I mean, to your whole point, like. I don't want to speak for anybody who's not here, but the gist that I have gotten is, yes, there are certain uses that council as a whole feels should be subjected to that extra scrutiny, really held out and put out there in front of the public. We might not be able to on the spot be able to come up with exactly what an objective criteria is. And comments that have made to me are, well, it depends on the site or this or that. So like, I'm not really expressing an opinion as to what's correct there, but I'm just trying to capture sort of the general conversations I've heard and had through this process. I mean, Shelley, you were on council for a minute there. What do you think? Am I capturing that correctly?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is what, it's hard for the consultants to work through. There's our group, there's task force input. Undoubtedly, council is going to want to have,
They're ready. If you've asked me. They're
yeah,
very
no,
eager.
I'm sure. And I do think that you've made a real attempt to balance, particularly from trying to move in from what the expectation is of our elected officials,
Mhm.
to trying to streamline what are today some very onerous processes to actually get to a place where you can actually understand the code that we have. I mean, I'm not particularly happy with what I just read again,
Mhm.
because I too don't really see. I see there's great improvement in form, and it'll expedite process. I'm not sure that there's. I think that it brings up to date what's happened since 77 to today physically in the town. But I think that the spirit of the document still reflects what I think based on what we believe to be the current position of the town on what they want to see in our town. And most of all, I think it reflects, which is exactly what the consultants were charged with. It should, and in most ways, I do think it does reflect the comprehensive plan. Because that's really the basis from which they had to work. They were
Mhm.
told to work by that. That was an onerous, expensive process the town went through. And I guess like it or not, because people have there's parts of it I don't like. I'm sure, but there's a lot of good parts too, but that is, for better, for worse, what was agreed to as our comprehensive plan.
And I mean, that's a really good thing to bring up because, there was an enormous wealth of comments from most of you on pretty much every section. And I mean, I can personally attest that Carolyn and I sat there and personally, on camera went through every single one that we could. And then when, my availability ran out for us to do that another day, she kept cracking at it and we kept firing emails back and forth. And there were some things that, different comments where somebody wanted something that was over here and somebody wanted something that was over here. And the decision-making process for what made it into this draft is, well, what tacks the best to the comprehensive plan and to the messages that I've been given as this project was greenlit by council. I mean, we've had positions change over that time. That's another challenge is, trying to put the finger on exactly what everybody wants. as these groups have, had some turnover, so. At the base of everything, it has to be what was asked for in the comprehensive plan.
I don't want to speak for anyone else, but Dan, you may agree with this, that one of my frustrations in trying to, I will admit, I gave pretty significant comments all the way through until over the holidays because I was away doing other things. But when I went back recently before this meeting to look at it, I too didn't really see anything that I really didn't see anything except for maybe some grammatical.
That surprises me because we went very specifically over like the bike comments that you had with the parking reduction.
I
and
didn't
things
get
like
through it
that.
all, I
Okay.
admit, but I didn't, but even that's not the point, because I agree with you. I might want this and
I want the opposite.
and you want the opposite. So I get that part completely. And I think that part of what many of us probably did is just give you the benefit of our thinking,
Mhm.
Point, counterpoint. But what drove me crazy was that, and I can accept that something just, I misunderstood. It was overruled. I'm sure you had very good reason. You explained some to me offline, but there was nowhere that any of us could go and even get an indication of from what we reviewed in the beginning
Mhm.
to where there were changes.
So,
I mean,
I'm not like
You
you trying to
literally
be
had to
glib, like
read-
this is a legitimate question. Would a track changes document help?
Well, at least it would give us it would have given me the ability to see if an area where change has been made. I could look at, one of my lists and say, oh, and whatever, 1302-180, oh, I guess then like my thought.
Mhm.
Okay, fine. It's not that important to me. It's kind of a small thing. But then I might have something else that was like, oh, I'm going to push back on this. Like,
Mhm.
come to this meeting, which is what I think you were asking us to do.
Yes,
Come to
please.
this meeting and say, this is important to me. This is my top 5 list of what's really important to me. And it didn't, what we got didn't make it easy to do that, or made it impossible to do that without rereading everything again. So that was sorry to be critical, but that's.
Carolyn, do you have any thoughts? Because she's the keeper of the document, so I don't want to speak for her on this, but I mean, I think it's useful for us to understand like what is going to help everybody work through this easier.
Yeah, I mean, that is something, with the volume of comments that we got, it was hard to figure out what would be an efficient use of the project budget to give you that kind of feedback. So hearing the conversation now, I see that perhaps the solution that I didn't think of in the moment would have been essentially, like you said, like a track changes document, something that like I identified as I made changes, this like highlighted or something that this section changed. That was not a solution that I considered going through. So I do appreciate that, while I know a lot of the areas where I made changes, it did not, you wouldn't know unless you had them both like up side by side going page by page. I see that is a challenge. So I do acknowledge that was perhaps not fully thought out on our end.
Well, let's, because we're all here, some of you, I assume, have prepared notes or have things on your mind. Like, what are your top 5? Because what I can say at least is, maybe there's a better format that we can deliver. Hey, here's where we went with this. But Carolyn and I are here now, and we were expecting to talk through those things, if people had particular questions. So like, please, this is exactly what we want to discuss right now.
My top one, as I said, is definitions and making sure that what we defined is consistent throughout the document. So we don't refer somewhere in a section about whatever, refer to somebody's home as opposed to the dwelling, just be more objective in the terminology we use, because we don't define home anywhere. And somebody would consider their apartment their home, not
Yeah.
necessarily, so. But I also had a couple, so I had some significant comments on the parking section that it was excessive in the square footages that were required.
Let's talk about this because I think I got different opinions from every single
Well,
person on it.
I mean, for instance.
Like, we've got the range of Dan, which, hey, I'm not mad at this at all. You were like, let's kill the parking minimum, or the parking, minimum, let's put in a maximum, and like, that's
Yeah.
really progressive.
It is.
The city may have even, I don't know, Carolyn, you'd know. if the
We,
city-
I used to
No, the
put
city hasn't done
maximum.
that.
All right, for some reason, it was being discussed at some
Yes,
point.
they've talked about it, but they're not doing it.
I mean, but I've got that from Dan. I've got other people saying this is all totally arbitrary, but I'm like throwing them
Well,
into
no,
Google saying what's industry.
No, there are
just like
standards,
that,
there are standards, but it wasn't broken. So to say all retail establishments, commercial, whatever, are 1 per 250. Furniture stores don't need 1 per 250. There are so many uses that could, so anyway, that was one of them.
I think, and what Carolyn will have to fact checking on this, because I know this is in our current code, and I'm not totally sure whether we brought it over, in the next one, but I believe there's a function where you can say to town council, like, okay, actually, based on this parking demand study, I need.
Oh, no,
way
there is a
less.
parking demand study.
So that's we're trying to make generalizations that are not so granular that we can't function administratively. With all of those caveats of, yes, but if this really doesn't make sense, make your case, like that back door is there.
Okay, well, let's talk about signs then. Where is a political sign not defined as a temporary sign?
Oh, man, you had to bring this one up.
Because a temporary sign is all I'm seeing defined, and it says you can have 1 per residential lot.
So I will speak carefully on this. Because this is a complicated issue that was dealt with outside of the zoning
There's
code
a
repeatedly.
resolution that covers it.
Yes, so there's a resolution. This is also in mostly the property maintenance code.
Okay,
That was an ordinance. You're looking at me so skeptical.
I'm just like, how does somebody reading the zoning know that?
Let me, because they're probably A, not gonna listen, and B, they're gonna call us. That's the real answer, but
Or get a citation for having 5 signs in their yard, which I did last year.
so. That is something that I do not think we should be citing people for. I know that this was a thorny question that Carolyn and I chewed on for a while. Because you cannot say political signs are exempt because that is not content
Right.
neutral.
Right.
However, and Shelley, were you on council when we did the last amendment? Yes, you were. We beat that one to death, and
If
that
you've got it
was,
covered, fine.
that was the preference of the council at the time, is that they wanted to regulate those types of what I call snipe signs, but as a property maintenance issue, we had to put something in the zoning code.
That's the only place it could be. The only other one, which I had a specific comment on in signs, is are you really going to make the Fairfield Inn turn off their sign at 10 o'clock at night? It says all non-residential uses can't have their signs illuminated.
I feel like we took that out. Carolyn, did we take that
I
out?
looked at it today.
Maybe it was within X amount of feet of a lot that we took that.
Now,
out.
I didn't, so my
No,
comment was.
So
can we
the
re- Go ahead.
the regulation is that they have to be turned off at 10 p.m. or 1/2 hour past the close of business, whichever is later. I would say that a hotel doesn't have a close of business, so they would not have to turn off their sign.
That's right. And I remember she and I talked about this in our review because UPMC was the one that I thought of.
Right, and I'm thinking churches. So churches are in residential districts. They have lit signs. Do they have a close of business? I mean, it just seemed like there was a better way of dealing with it than that, maybe setting it up by zoning district. So maybe on Perry Highway, in the town center, and the other ones, yeah, turn them off or whatever. But anyway, those were the primary sign things that, and I agree with Dan. I think there should be a maximum parking. I think we should look at ways to reduce the amount of parking.
So
impervious
this is
surface.
something that I was hoping we were just going to talk about in general. So if we
Yep.
all don't mind, I'm just gonna jump in and launch this one.
Yep.
Because again, I got a different set of comments where I've got, you know, I think it was Jonathan, he's not here this evening, but he made a comment that
Let's
was
pick
like,
on him.
no, but I mean, this is just to show the range of opinions
Yeah.
that we got. You know, I think his comment was like, even on paperclip spots, like no less than 10 feet width, which we don't have right now.
Yeah.
And very early on in this project, and again, like we've had all different people throughout this organization change positions. Maybe this is not the will of the majority anymore. I don't know. We had been talking very early on in this project about how 9 feet is the standard parking space width nowadays. And so we had to kill that 10-foot width because every single one of those spaces that is 10 feet wide is 18 additional square feet of impervious surface area that we're requiring. And everyone was like, yeah, that makes sense. And then I probably got 2 or 3 out of 7 that came back and said, we can't shrink these parking spaces. They'll be too small. So that's kind of something that, I mean, look, I feel strongly that 9 feet width is correct. It's, you know, most cars are about 6.5 feet wide. If you're an
If you drive an
SUV,
Armada or
Well,
a Suburban.
you
A
got
Navigator.
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 That's the thing, like if you're driving an extremely large car compared to the average car on the road, you probably take considerations for how you go about your life. Like, and every other community is not designing the parking spots around a Hummer. So,
No, I agree.
you know, again, that came back to, okay, what was our comp plan directive? We're supposed to be a little more, you know, like, where can we pick up green space and stormwater management? Shaving off that extra foot of parking is a really easy way to do a little bit of that. But if the will of the majority is no longer that, the 10-foot will make it into the code, although I don't think for the angle parking spaces, because that's just bigger than anyone probably realizes. But yeah, I mean, like, what do we feel? Let's talk. We need to make a decision. on
I
this
had
one.
provided a comment that 10 feet, given the size of today's cars, I thought 10 feet was more appropriate. Admittedly, I didn't think of impervious surfaces. That didn't occur to me. That's an interesting counterbalancing issue.
And that's why I didn't challenge the 9x18 because of impervious surfaces.
Yeah.
Personally, driving a car, I'd rather have more room, so
Yeah.
I'm
Oh,
not
sure.
dinged.
I'm
But
parking, let's be clear, I struggle to hit the 10-foot spaces.
yeah,
But, you know, I mean, that was just,
but the impervious surfaces.
yeah,
But
you know, like we kept the sidewalks at 4 feet width
Yeah.
because you can shave off an extra foot of concrete if you
Yeah.
don't go up to 5. Like, we were
Somewhere
really
in
trying to
the,
be
we've got a
conscious of
definition
those.
of a 5-foot sidewalk. In fact, I made
there
that
is, there was
comment.
a
Yes.
definition
There's a
of a
4-foot
5-foot.
somewhere.
Yeah.
I didn't go back to
I
try
can
to find
point
it.
out that
and a
it's
5-foot.
consistent.
There-
And I said that was
yes.
inconsistent. So there is some.
One was in Saldo, one was in zoning.
Right.
I remember in my review, we made a comment to
Yeah.
revise that. So that's probably, I think that what we did was revise the Saldo to match the zoning, but that was the one that just came out
Yeah.
a couple days ago.
How about, can we talk about like when we're defining things, not getting so specific from a technology standpoint? Because one of my comments was, we're using level 1, 2, and 3 electric vehicle chargers now, and that technology is already changing. So is there a way that we can not put
Um,
ourselves out?
I remember Carolyn and I specifically discussed this a couple weeks ago, and I,
We did.
do you remember, because I have like the gist of, but if you have a better recollection of where we landed on that, I think that what we went with was, you know, like particularly coming up on this, like the Schultz rezoning,
Yeah.
where because I did a lot of, you know, Googling to figure out what the heck it was they were trying to
Yeah.
do, and it was pretty consistent that this level 1, 2, and 3 was based on certain voltages and certain
Yeah.
function, like, so I think.
But ones aren't being even used anymore.
Right. I think that what we landed on in our working session was, yes, that's a valid point that the technology is changing. And we're trying to future-proof things as much as we can. But I don't think that we're prepared within the scope that we have left to noodle on it so hard that we can be confident that whatever we come up with is future. Like, that's,
Yeah.
we will come back, this code will be amended from time to time. It should be. That's how we got in this position. It wasn't, you know?
Did we even, and this just popped into my head, I know it wasn't a comment, but I agree with you that, like, that's why a lot of, some new codes are calling them modality destinations.
Okay.
like for electric charging,
Yeah.
things like that, but what about CNG? Is that
Oh,
even?
We didn't really address CNG
I
at
don't
all,
think
and
so.
right now, I mean, that would be a really tough one. The only thing you're gonna get CNG right now is gonna be fleets. I mean, you're just not gonna get individual vehicles. So
Are you talking about the
fleets-
refueling stations or what are you,
Yeah.
what's your issue?
Yeah.
Well, I know,
Compressed
well,
natural
I've
gas.
built them, so I.
Yeah,
know them.
okay.
And yes, they are being used for fleets, but they also are being used for businesses. And there's also conversions.
Mhm.
So my point is not whether CNG
Should we just make an
is-
alternate?
is just that it is, there are CNG fueling
Yep.
stations. And I'm saying our code just shouldn't,
Mhm.
Right.
I don't think it includes it at all in those uses. So it's a use.
Look at alternate fueling
Would it be,
sources.
would
Yeah.
it be an accessory use to an existing facility
It could
typically?
be. It could
Okay.
be.
Well, it could be.
It could
It's
be, but
generally
it
not.
also could be a gas
Mhm.
station.
Because we
It's
have,
generally not
we have.
attached to a
both,
gasoline station.
So.
Oh, no.
Would it be attached to like,
it could-
I don't know that much.
it
about
could
this,
be
so
next
like
to
an
a
industrial-
warehouse.
actually a
We
warehouse,
actually
like,
just
would that be
refer to
accessory the
vehicle
warehouse?
fueling, right? You don't, you're
That
just
would,
talking
that would be
vehicle
where you would
fuel.
use it.
Okay.
So
Uh,
theoretically, vehicle fueling
there-
could be
there are-
CNG too.
There are
One of my
refueling,
things was that
CNG refueling
there's a-
stations
in my
that are open
opinion,
to the
there's
public.
a whole
They
big
don't, they're not
environmental
private
difference
Oh, yeah, huge.
Between
Okay,
Oh, yeah.
They're very expensive to
petroleum
install.
fueling.
Oh, yeah.
again.
So it's only gonna be a
question,
corporate thing.
Do we know off top?
No, I
It's not here,
I agree.
that I could look at and be
I mean,
like,
I
okay,
think they
this
should
happened
look
here,
at it.
blah,
I
blah,
was
blah.
thinking they should
There are
look
several in
differently.
Pittsburgh, but
Not
around here.
I don't think there's any here.
Yeah, there's one in Southside, there's one in.
I.
One in Crafton.
Yeah.
There's-
Where?
It's right up in front of the Crafton Giant Eagle warehouse.
Oh,
For their fleet?
okay.
It might, at one point, they were talking about opening it to the public. Yes, they do.
Yeah.
They do
It
have
never
a.
came up. That's interesting to know.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think this is a good question. What I'm gonna turn it into a practical decision point here, because we are pretty far along in this project. That doesn't mean that we can't make significant changes. But is this one that we feel strongly enough about that we want to send, you know, see if our consultants have the labor time to like do some research and write some good criteria? Or is this something that we say, we need to address this somehow, like we'll come back in that cleanup amendment, because everybody does one after these codes. It's normal. I fully expect that we're gonna be
I think
doing
we should look
something
at
like
coming
that.
back in the cleanup. Once we digest this, then we know how we can better address it.
I think, yeah, I mean, it's.
You know
it's
what I
just,
mean?
Like, is this something that we want to ride with is like a use unlisted right now and come back quickly and deal with it?
Oh, you mean
Or-
the CNG?
Yeah.
But I just,
Yeah.
I don't think it's the biggest thing in the world. I'm just saying it probably should have
It's
been
something that's
included. And I
relevant.
also think that petroleum fueling stations should be viewed differently, which are special exception, still in the current
Yeah, I could
document.
read it, yeah.
It's 13, whatever, any,
Yeah.
but I do think that electric fueling stations are an entirely different animal.
Mhm.
They don't have the kind of environmental risks. They
Mhm.
don't, they're just a different animal. I personally don't think that they need to be, they should be lumped together with.
Why are we even defining it, by the way? Because I didn't see where we were using it as a use. That was one of the questions. I wanted
It's
to
in the
know.
accessory use section.
Yeah, but so we can't have a hub? We can't have it as a principal use?
Well, right now. That was, and we did, because Shelley made a very specific, I mean, you sent me an article about it, and I remember, and I looked through it and kind of thought. I don't know if at this moment, I'm ready to imagine a whole entire lot turning into impervious specifically for that.
There are companies that are
And-
doing that all over the US.
Right, but do we want that? Is that what we want? Like, that's a good question for now. Let's say, a corner lot on Perry Highway, I had somebody call me about this, gets bought and somebody turns it just straight up into a vehicle charging
See, I
facility.
think our comprehensive plan absolutely would want that to happen.
Okay.
It has fewer impacts. I agree with her from anything else. I mean, the fast chargers, they're there for 20 minutes. But
I mean,
I guess
that's,
I'm
again, my
thinking of it
opinion.
as like compared to like a cafe, or like, so, like, is that now? And that's just my personal take, but like, I'm not married to that. If you all say, no, I actually think that this is a really good principal use for us to have, let's put it in there. So let's-
So I will say we did We did adjust the definition very slightly to the fueling station primary use. And granted, I will say that, yes, this is probably one of those things that this tweak was so slight, it would be hard to catch without the track changes thing. But the tweak that we made is intended for now to keep them all as the same use. So if it's a full electric vehicle charging station, if it's a full gasoline pumping station, if it's a full diesel pumping station, if it's a full CNG pumping station, or a combination thereof, it would all fall under that.
So it's just vehicle fueling and it's.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. For this iteration, that was how we decided to approach it. Again, as RJ said, if there's a desire to break that out a little bit more specifically, we can, but that was.
No, I like it general.
What do you think, Shelley?
I'm fine with that. I mean, as you said, you can come back and, I mean, you could nitpick every section one way or another and not be done for 10 years, so.
Right, and I mean, that's part of. Look, I don't want to market this draft as, yeah, it's good enough, because I really think that we made huge improvements, especially like the saldo is just a completely different document. Like, it's incredible how much more content is in there to reflect the kinds of things we ask about at these meetings.
Should we talk about the procedures then?
Well, yeah, so 1 second, and then that's probably a good idea. But there are going to be some things that, like, yes, we could spend multiple meetings, multiple months doing exactly what we did with oil and gas and with 5G, but that is not feasible or the goal or scope of this project. This is a total facelift. And if we want to get really granular, it is always okay to come back and plan to do that after this project concludes. But part of this is deciding what falls under that and what, we want to try to attack now. So I think that's kind of the question on the table for this kind of stuff. Anyway, did anyone, I don't want to move totally away from zoning, because I bet when we get into procedures, then we're kind of in Saldo land. Is there any other burning zoning stuff that people wanted to talk through before we move on? That feels like a no.
No, for me.
Okay, so Kathy, if you would like to tee up our application and procedures discussion.
Sure. Yeah, thanks for hanging in with us. I know this is a very long process. These are not easy documents to go through. So especially as volunteer planners as you are, so your time and effort is duly noted. One thing I will mention is that, and I think it was probably easier on my part to proceed in this manner, is every comment that I received, or every document with comments that I received from the Planning Commission, I was able to make a reply. It's easy, you made a comment, I can reply to it. So I tried to do that to every comment that you provided, and I'll send your document back and RJ can share it with you. So I don't know everyone's name, but the gentleman who said, well, how do we know what was done with that comment? And some of it maybe I need to talk to RJ about it. So that'll still be something that needs to be, that we'll put a pin in that, but you'll have those. The only one is, it's going to take me a little while, is Mr. Hall's comments. That was the file was something wrong with that file. It was a very large one that was hard to open, RJ. I finally was able to convert it through about 4 different ways where I can look at it.
Yeah, it like froze my Outlook every time I opened the email, but eventually my computer was able to handle it. There was just Jonathan isn't here tonight. But there must have been some sort of export.
Yeah, I don't know what happened. It was a huge 160 megabyte document. It was the same saldo as everyone else had. So I don't know.
No, it was something very weird happened, because I put it through a PDF compressor and it was still 60 megs.
Yeah, I had to do the same, but I had to open it up on my home computer because my work computer just thought it was a virus, I think. So you'll be able to get those, and then the ones that I said, well, I need to talk to RJ. I'll follow up with RJ and we'll make some decisions on those. But I think that process was just easier because this Saldo comments were probably a little more manageable, and you had the entire document except the definitions. So I did want to, before we end tonight, did want to talk about the procedure. And as RJ mentioned, I think the terminology is can be a little confusing for everyone. So the way that saldos will be reviewed is you essentially have 3 different levels. One is a development proposal that will be excluded. It's exempt from any saldo review. And I think there may be some confusion, even RJ, that we want to make sure that we're clear on what triggers an exemption from any saldo review. So the Planning Commission essentially wouldn't see it. The zoning officers and the township engineer certainly would, or excuse me, the town engineer would, through probably a pre-application meeting. And every development will go through a pre-application meeting, even if it's just a simple call to RJ. And she would make the determination of what type of review would be required based on the information they're supplying at the pre-app discussion or conference.
We kept the thresholds in the existing ordinance for
Yeah, you
that.
said the 4 lots and, yeah.
Oh, well, so
the
that's
minor.
for the minor
Yeah.
versus what I'm speaking about is the administrative review
Mhm.
process. So right now it is, if you are adding over 2,500 square feet
Yeah,
of
I saw
building
those,
footprint,
yeah.
or it was some percentage of expanding the use.
Yeah.
Or X amount of acres, like whichever is smaller. So we did not change that threshold, but it is certainly something that can be up for discussion if anyone has an issue with it.
So as RJ mentioned, let me just talk through like the different triggers, and then we can go back to them. There's exemption, which is conversion of a single family detached to 3 residential units or less. So you're not really splitting any properties, or you're not moving lot lines. You're taking a single family home and converting them. All of this, of course, would be subject to what's allowable within the zoning district in which that property sits. And that's the case with everything that happens within the saldo. There's also, as RJ mentioned, 25% or 2,500 square feet, whichever is less, expanding an existing building or adding an accessory building. And those are the 25% of the primary or 2,500 square feet or less. And that would be an administrative review exempt from the land development review process of preliminary and final. Then there's minor plans, which is minor lot adjustments. And what happens with a minor plan is you go straight to final site plan or final plan review. So this is something that the Planning Commission would see and review. But there's less information that you would typically get because it's considered minor. And in that, let me go back to, I didn't write it all down, so I've got 2 different documents. I want to go back to specifically what is considered a minor review, because I think a few of you had some comments. I had gotten all the way back. Sorry, I was looking for some information as you were talking. So I did search and destroy home. That sounds terrible, but I did search and destroy home and make it unit. I didn't destroy anyone's homes, but I did do that. So minor is, I want to make sure I get everything. Just bear with me as I go through the document. Minor, of course, like I said, lot line adjustments, minor subdivisions, where 4 or fewer lots are proposed to be subdivided from a tract. So this is something that the Planning Commission would see, but it would be done with a final plan that requires less information than a full final site plan typically would. And a minor land development is really subjective to the town. You can just determine that the land development proposal, where it is found that the intended development or modification of a site or use will create a minimal impact on traffic drainage. So it gives the town, the staff wide latitude to determine whether or not it requires all the full information that's required for a full site plan or full final plan. Excuse me, I'll try to use your terminology, but you would still see that. And again, that's going to be determined by staff during a pre-application meeting. And then parking lot expansions with 10 or fewer parking spaces or 4,000 square feet is also considered a minor. And then we have then we have preliminary and final for larger developments. But what I was trying to accommodate was your town typically likes to combine those into one review. The difference between that and a minor is you would require a lot more information. It would still go through one review process, and typically that would just be a final review. But what we're saying, it's a preliminary and a final together. So you're doing those concurrently. So you get all the full information. And then we added a major land development because there may be times where you need a full preliminary review and then a follow-up final review because the project is so large. And that's typically, as RJ had mentioned, for phased projects, phased subdivisions that are larger. So those are essentially the 4 review steps, the tiers that you would see, including the exemption. And then, as RJ had mentioned, a site plan, which many other communities just call a sketch plan, but wanted to get away from that. But a site plan is something that would be is required at a pre-application meeting. Basically, it's a basic concept of what is being proposed, enough for the staff to provide content or feedback on the content that's being shown, determine what tiered of review is required. And then also there's an opportunity for that plan to come before Planning Commission for input and advice. It doesn't trigger a review period. It's not considered preliminary plan review that triggers the 90-day process. It's just something that if a developer wants some feedback from the Planning Commission, that's an opportunity for them to get preliminary feedback. So I wanted to clarify that, make sure that as you see the document, that's one, what you expected, and 2, something you feel comfortable with.
I do also want to mention the pre-apps in particular. This is a new thing that we're codifying, but it's something that I have been doing in practice throughout.
It's important.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things that people, I think that they were just kind of used to noodling around at this phase. And that's not a good position for all of us to be in, because then you're on the clock for the MPC, you all are pressured to make a decision or, negotiate an exemption or an extension under that timeline. We wanted to get away with that and also make sure that it's guaranteed that we can collect the labor fees from the engineers. Because right now what they've been doing as a courtesy, since it's a new thing that we've implemented, is basically holding their bills until the application actually comes in and then billing the escrow, which means that, sometimes they've been losing money.
Time. Yep.
Yeah. So,
Do you have a formal review committee that meets?
no, we don't. I mean, honestly, it's mostly, but I will tell you who we've required in this is the town engineer to always be present, because that's typically who we bring to those. We did discuss whether we wanted to step it up to a guaranteed formal review committee, but ultimately my feeling was the schedules are too disparate to make sure that that works for everybody. Like if we include Public Works, they leave at 2:30, things like that. It's not really been an issue because we send the plans out to those, as soon as we get them, and they get to provide, like the fire marshal provides comments, Public Works does. So we didn't require it at pre-app, but we do require it during the formal plan review. I guess if that's kind of what the review committee is.
Yeah.
Well, then like, yes, but
Yeah.
administratively, yeah. We had talked about it in a different context, like forming that specifically for the pre-app meetings.
Right.
Which we didn't want to commit to schedule-wise, so.
So that's the process that you'd laid out originally in the plan, in the saldo that we saw earlier, right, Kathy? I'm not seeing.
That's correct. This is nothing, there was nothing new. There was just a lot of questions and comments about the procedure that I wanted to make sure was clear. We tried in the earlier draft just to show a flow chart, an org chart to help explain it. And then in this draft that you have, you'll see the plans are defined within the text, but there'll also be more concise definitions within the definition sections once that's complete.
Yeah, I think my only comment was maybe move the minor before the major, just not knowing whether we got more major or minor applications.
I
Yeah,
think
the
pretty even split,
requirements.
honestly,
Okay.
but I think it's fine to throw the minor,
Yeah.
you know, maybe like from increasing into, you know.
Yeah, that's what I was just thinking that you would,
That's a fine comment. Al, what
I'm just curious.
what you thinking?
Under these definitions, would the rich plan now be a minor land development?
Oh, no.
no,
No,
it's still major.
Because it's,
It's not phased.
but it's more than
Four
four
lots.
lots and
Okay.
it's creating public
Yeah,
infrastructure.
Yeah, it has a road, it has, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, both, Kathy, please help me out here. If you create public infrastructure, does that automatically move you into major?
Well,
Yes.
it moves you into preliminary and final. Major as combined.
Oh, okay.
Major is,
Yes.
we want it to be two separate reviews because this is such a
Oh,
large project.
Gotcha, so that,
So
yes,
there's
that's-
not really,
that's what I meant.
there's not really a term for combining the two. It's your option. And you do that at the pre-application meeting. You make that determination. So the developer isn't coming in and saying, this is an X review I need. You're making that determination, say, oh, you know what? You can take this through a consistent, I'm sorry, I'm not getting the words. It's getting, my brain's lost on me right now, but you can take this through one process, but it's preliminary and final combined.
Gotcha.
But
Okay.
it bumps to his question, it bumps you to the higher level of information submitted by the applicant.
That's
Yeah.
correct. So, and the information for a major is still the same. It's just you're giving yourself an option, or you're giving yourself an opportunity to review it twice because you need more information. You need to look at the phasing, things like that. That's the major.
And that would.
And
be
of course, staff has latitude to not require some of the information if it's not necessary. So there's probably more, and they can also require more information if something's unclear. And I tried to point that out in some of the comments. I certainly appreciate we want to try to, I won't go back to the list issue again, but if staff says, hey, we need to see more information on this or on roadway design, then it's certainly within their purview to say it's not a complete site plan. We don't recommend moving it forward until we see that information, that design done. So it gives you hopefully enough latitude to ask, pull back and then retract and then expand what's being requested.
So was it the Saldo that had the design standards for drive-throughs?
It does.
And given my comments that I gave were based in.
You had comments on this too, didn't you?
Yeah, it was
Yeah,
based
there
in
were
the
a couple.
Starbucks thing. We ought to let them provide us with documentation on their business rather than tell them they need 2 spaces in between, which is the standard and I think what was in here. But just based on the fact that if they know their business and they want to provide that, because they said they needed 7 for the 4
So-
million.
7 between the
Well,
board and the.
Between the ordering place. and-
Yeah.
Right,
They
because of
actually
the
got 12,
timing
15.
of it takes to produce the orders,
Mhm.
which makes
But
sense.
the ordinance only required 4 is every.
I think it was a minimum
Yeah,
of 4, but hopefully,
We bumped that up to 6.
Oh, okay.
Because we had comments. Again, this is an art more than it is a science.
Yeah.
But
things
again,
change.
it kind of goes back to your earlier conversation about, do we put maximum on parking and the whole impervious surface? So my comment here is I did bump it up because RJ, you had mentioned it and there were a number of different comments. You don't want to necessarily require, it's like requiring every parking lot to be built out to the Friday after Thanksgiving.
Right,
Yeah.
You don't want to force developments to overbuild, but those who understand their market and their business model, like Chick-fil-A, which I've never seen anything like Chick-fil-A. I don't think anyone has.
Just got one by
Or
my
s-
house. Unreal.
Yeah, or Starbucks. They can always request more and they can add more. They're not even requesting. This is just a minimum. But
And
making it.
Also, I think on the flip side, you know, this is the beauty of having a code that now has a much more clearly divided and defined saldo versus zoning code. Everything that's in that, you know, Article 13, that goes to the zoning hearing board if you want a variance. Everything that's going to be in the new Article 11, that's a modification request. So, you know, if somebody comes in and says, oh yeah, I have this little rinky dink drive-through that never has more than 3 cars in the driveway, no matter what, you can come in and ask for that modification and support it with data. So I think there's, in the way that we have used this tool, a lot more room for us to protect ourselves, but also use common sense.
Well, to review, I mean, to really review the plans,
Yes.
rather than your concern that they put stuff down on paper that we say we want and they meet the requirements. So
Right.
now you've got some leeway to start asking some decent questions about things. So. All right.
That's all I had. I'm sure you'll have more. And like I said, the next draft will have the definitions, and I'll send your comments. I got to get through Mr. Hall. Hopefully I can get through that document. It's just so
Yeah,
big.
I can, if you have issues, I can sit down and transcribe it. I just kind of ran out of time before the
No,
holiday.
I think it's going to work. I had a lot of workarounds, which gave me, actually, you guys talking about zoning so long, I was able to sit here and try to reduce it even more. So I was still working on my Canva stuff
So
while you guys were chatting.
here are a couple things that I want to call out for everybody to think about next month. 'Cause first off, I had a, so we have the open house on February 16th. In an ideal world, we would have been able to get a recommending vote at the February meeting. However, I think because we have particularly put a lot more, you know, time and effort, honestly, than I even realized we were going to into the saldo. Like Kathy brought some really great stuff to the table that I didn't even know was going to make it in, you know. Like this is still very much like you haven't gotten the time to spend with the new draft that, you know, you did with the other chapters. I'm thinking maybe just calling it now and saying March is our target for a recommending vote is going to be better. Now that is going to mean that we're going to go to the open house and we're going to be talking through with the public. You know, what we've got is a relatively finalized draft, understanding that there could still be some tweaks, but I mean, the big picture stuff of how this impacts people, like your R2 setback is going down to 10 from 15, like that's not going to change. So we can start talking to the public about those aspects and soliciting the feedback on.
And you're going from an R2, from an R1 to an R2, but overall,
Right.
it's not changing what's allowed. and-
Right,
yeah.
right. So we are going to, you know, be talking to the public before we have a final recommending vote about those things, but there's not going to be any huge changes, I don't believe at least, that would really throw that off. But I'm proposing that we shoot for March instead of next month for a recommending vote. And in the meantime, when looking at, you know, for example, the revised saldo, something that I really want to call attention to that I think is very cool is how much more we amped up our public open space requirements. And all of the options in different ways. Like Jonathan had a bunch of great comments on that, actually. Since I haven't, you know, reviewed this new draft, I had a lot of comments on that to kind of just shape it more towards the will of council to not be owning properties.
Yeah.
And to
Yeah.
really discourage people to get away from that and prefer the other.
Yeah, I think my
options.
comments were around.
Yeah.
Don't go for best
I
pocket
mean,
parks. We don't
there
want
are
them.
some, like, that's how our ordinance on the
Yeah.
books is written, and we just kind of go, all right, they're gonna pay the fee in lieu anyway, and that's not really what we
No,
want.
no.
But, you know, I'm sure that Kathy has done some work on that, and it was already pretty great off the bat. So for those of you that are really into green stuff and, you know, more recreation, check that part out for sure.
Well, one of my top issues was also the private roads and the dead, and not private roads, but the dead ends. And I know that Kathy had addressed some of that. I think one of the comments I made, and I wasn't sure if it was really clear in the plan, is that we can also require developers to leave a 60-foot right of way if it's possible, that would be something that could be developed next to them,
Mm.
as opposed to letting them put their cul-de-sac in and cutting off all future
Mm.
access to additional properties. Was that in there, Kathy?
I want to, that is something that typically the town should be looking at. is
Yeah.
where connections are, and
Right.
I have to double check how strong the language is to encourage. I think it is in there. It may not be directly with cul-de-sacs.
Yeah, I
But
think
that's
I suggested you put them together and kind of enhance it a little bit. Because I've never seen so many dead end roads as I've seen in the Pittsburgh area. And all of them aren't related to
And that was,
topography.
that was because coving was really big when most of this
Okay.
area up here was developed. Yeah, so I found a brochure in my office actually from like the 90s that was like, what is coving? Look at how many things you can fit in if you do 5 cul-de-sacs.
Yeah.
So yeah, right. So, you know, we've got a few.
Think about how you plow your roads and the emergency vehicles get through.
It was the 90s. But anyway,
Okay,
so okay. I do not know yet if we can have Kathy and Carolyn back. I am gonna do some budget investigation and see what we can potentially come up with for February. But either way, take a couple weeks, digest what you can. Feel free to call out any burning questions that didn't come up tonight that you want to pick through more, or tell me, like, I really think we need to hit this hard here. I don't want to wait until we do an amendment later. Like, those are the good things I need to know now. Hopefully, we can come back in February. You know, see what still maybe needs to be tweaked, and then be planning on a recommending vote in March. Does that sound realistic to everybody?
Okay.
what is, I don't have the 16th on my calendar.
That's the open,
Right.
4 to 8 should be a Thursday, right?
Yeah, it's a Thursday.
Yes.
Okay.
So basically, same time, same place, same. drill.
Okay, I can always stay for part of it because it's my daughter's 40th birthday and
Don't
she'll
worry,
kill me
that-
if I'm not there.
We really got the bulk of our traffic between 4 and 6.
That's what I
last
thought
time,
they
so-
were.
Yeah.
There were
Is
people,
it at 4 o'clock again?
yeah,
Yep.
And what are
That's
you
right.
doing, 4 to 8
Mhm.
with 2 presentations?
4 to 6.
We'll talk about that on.
Oh, it doesn't
Tuesday.
matter, no, no. But it's,
Because I
4
don't know off the top of my head.
but it is 4 to 8.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
correct.
Yeah, there were people waiting in line.
Okay, we have one more item on the agenda, which is to approve the December 6th, 2022 minutes. Can I have a motion to approve them?
So moved.
Second,
I guess we have to make sure no one's got comments.
Oh, good catch.
I have no comments, but I think we just left it on that.
Thank you.
I have no comments. Any comments? I have a motion. I don't have a second. Second, Brendan. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Minutes are approved.
Hey.
And the last item is general public comment, but we have none, so I assume we are adjourned, and we need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Seconded. In favor of adjourning,
Aye.
opposed? We are adjourned.
Thank you much, everyone.
Everyone have a good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Night.